which would imply, that it is indeed streaming. Let me just see if I can find it. Yeah, it's come up as an event. Nice.
In person, virtually.
Oh, someone's got a car.
Why is
Okay, I think I've got you there. Yeah, okay, I've got your stream as well, so I'm just going to copy that. There we go. I've got you live.
Cool. Nice. Right.
Okay, I think okay, so hello everyone,
Hello,
thanks.
yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. You introduce yourself, PP. I'm sure people know who you are, but
no, I just realized because we're live. All right, yeah. So hello everyone. My name is Perspective Philosophy. You can just call me Lewis. I'm a master's graduate in postgraduate. Would it be? I have a master's degree in philosophy. I was doing a PhD until my lecture was made redundant, and I'm to offer philosophical critique on this position, and I also run a YouTube channel called Perspective Philosophy.
Yeah, you can call him PP. That's what I do. I think it's better that way.
Yeah, PP. Yes.
PP. Yeah, I've given full transparency. I have given PP a little rundown of what happens, and obviously I could be biased, but I do have a feeling this is gonna agitate PP a little bit. But we'll see. Right, you ready, PP?
And so I'm just I'll just share the stream as well.
Absolutely. I'm really hoping that what comes of this is he talks to you, but I don't know. He used to have lots of conversations with lots of different people, but I haven't really seen much from him recently. Except
to be fair, I haven't been around very much. I mean, if Alex does see this, Alex, I'm more than happy to speak to you. I think you're a good guy. We've spoke before. Obviously, we'll have variations of ethical beliefs, but I'm sure we can talk through those things. And so, yeah, 100%. In many ways, they might be interesting because since our last conversation, I'm now a Christian. So, Cosmic Skeptic, who's a renowned atheist, or agnostic, actually, I think he is now. So he's an agnostic. So he's went agnostic. I've went atheist. We've all just went one step over. So yeah, so that I think that would be interesting. I'd 100% be game to talk to him. But it depends on how this goes. I mean, after it might be that there's nothing to say at the end of this, depending upon on the video we'll review. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, right. Let's get into it then. Have you shared the stream?
Yes.
You have.
On the second. I'm just going to add Cosmic Skeptic as well, so he knows that I'm doing it.
Yes.
No, I think it's just courtesy, to be entirely honest with you, for Alex. I don't want to be I don't want to feel like it's something that I wouldn't want him to see even. Okay, there we go.
Without further ado, let's get into it. The first bit's kind of them, talking. It takes a moment, but we'll write it out.
Alex O'Connor, welcome to my podcast.
Mikhaila, it's good to see you again. If not in person, virtually, it's good to see that you're doing well.
Thank you very much. I feel like this podcast has been a long time coming, so it should be good. It has, yeah, a very long time. I think the last time we saw each other was at Oxford, right?
Yes, it was. And I have a bit of a bone to pick with you about that, actually, because I remember not long after that event, which anybody who has seen or is familiar with the both of us might not know that I was there, because you were speaking and I was just kind of there as a guest in my fancy black tie. And there was one particular speaker on the other side to you who... it got kind of, people were making a bit of a song and dance out of this woman's speech, and I found it quite funny because I remember being in the room, and I'm sure people will have seen this because I'm pretty sure you took the clip and put it on your own channel, right?
Yeah, with some sort of inflammatory title.
Yeah, and I know your dad talked about it too, quite a bit, about this crazed woman, this crazed feminist woman who is doing this ridiculous.
They're talking about Caroline Adams, aren't they? That's her name. I think I remember. Do you remember those Oxford debates very well?
Not really, to be entirely honest. I did see some of it, but I didn't. I've been super busy, so I'm taking time out to review this one. I haven't had the chance I've got a backlog. I've got a
You
backlog
got
of
a
things I need to
backlog.
go through. Yeah.
Yeah, basically, she was talking about like she's renowned for just drawing the lines between feminism and animal rights, and all this kind of intersectional stuff. She's one of those people who talks about that, and I think they're referring to her. I'm surprised you didn't
Right.
speak during that panel. Would have, yeah, you'll be deeply disappointed by that entire thing, I think.
Ridiculous vegan speech, and I must say it was a bit fanciful. And I
A
remember
bit fanciful. A bit fanciful. I'm going to insert a clip here, and then we're going to see what people think about a bit fanciful.
Yeah.
She forgets to insert it.
I guess I'm trying to be diplomatic here, because I did think it was hilarious, because I was sort of sat on this front bench, and I was directly opposite your dad, and I thought, watching this speech is funny enough. Like, it was quite an entertaining thing to do, but I thought, of all the people to do this speech in front of all the people on planet Earth, it was just hilarious. So I sort of seeing him just like shriveling in his
just
in his chair.
Cringe and pain.
Yeah. But so there was this
funny.
So I remember sort of you and him both posting about it a lot, and I don't know, I wondered if you were sort of posting about it as if to say, hey, look at this wokeness, or whether you were posting it to say, hey, look at this sort of veganism. I didn't know if it was more the veganism part or more the woke part that you were sort of trying to warn of.
100% more the woke part. However, I do think that there is an overlap. Now, I don't think you embody that overlap, but I do think that there is an overlap.
You could but there's overlap between conservatism and fascism. Like, you know what I mean? And I'm not going to call every conservative a fascist out of like realization, like out of politeness, right? I know that it would be a mischaracterization. So if you know that it's not relevant to all vegans, then
why say it?
Why bring it up? You know?
It's just very like sloppy, and I think we're all guilty of it when we just don't like someone or a group, just to quickly. Brand them all and dismiss. But
yeah, I mean, I will be the first to say, like, I know of vegans like this. Do you know what I mean? But again, I also know of, like, as I say, like, conservatives who are fascistic. I know of like socialists who are more authoritarian and on towards the communist side of things, and I find that it's just better to characterize an individual by their words rather than a group, like a stigma, rather than anything else.
Yeah, because that's the way you're going to find the actual truth of what they think is probably best from their own mouth.
And I think she's probably and I think we're all very well aware of the stigma that surrounds both wokeism and veganism, and I think conflating it is just it's rhetorically valuable, but it's like it has rhetorical use, but it's not necessarily conducive of reason.
Nothing more. I agree.
Especially with people who are really interested in like protecting the climate, veganism, like wokeism. I think there's an overlap, but what I was trying to portray with her video was
bring them in as well.
Was the woke part for sure. I think most of her
genuinely. I mean, like Jordan, her dad is quite a climate change denier, as far as I'm aware.
I don't think he denies climate change. From what I'm aware, I will give Jordan.
No.
Professor Peterson, he's due. I think that he's a fairly reasonable guy, but I think that he believes that the economy holds precedence primarily because of its impact upon human life, which would be fair enough if climate change wasn't also going to ravage the lives of the humans that live in the lowlands of Bangladesh, for example. So I think that there is a lack of universal consideration, but I'm not surprised because of his view of morality. Seems like he talks about quote unquote moralists a lot, yet also preaches from a Christian perspective, which I find rather confusing. But I'm sure that he has a way of blending what appears to be a Nietzschean critique which is antithetical, by the way, with Christian values, 100% antithetical with Christian values, which is why he wrote the book, The Antichrist, and of the book Ecce Homo, which means behold the man, which was how I think, was it Pontius Pilate presented Jesus Christ in the Bible. So I don't know how he manages to marry these things together, but I do think that he's a fairly reasonable guy, and he's not a climate change denier, but rather
I
thinks
think
that climate change isn't as valuable as something like economic growth.
Yeah, I think I'm getting confused because last thing I heard with him regarding climate change was he kind of dismissed the overpopulation discussion.
Yeah, I think he dismissed Malthusianism, which I understand, to be fair. Because I think that he's probably being highly critical of a Malthusian ethic, which is, or Malthusian ethical economic. I can't speak. Malthusian ethical economic take, which I do think is, I know it's a mouthful, but it's also
Just a bit.
it's also wrong. I see where he's coming from, but yeah, I think that it's also just so happens to be incredibly appealing to a certain demographic.
Yeah, again, yeah. God. All right, let's carry on.
Like, most of the language she used had more to do with that than veganism.
Yeah. It's actually one of the main things that I try to promote whenever I'm talking about veganism, or just the ethics of animal suffering more broadly, is to try and separate it from, I want to say political connotations, but that's a little bit too broad. But there's this idea that to be a vegan, you have to take up yoga and wear loose clothing and grow out your hair and this kind of thing. I think we need more vegans who wear suits. We need more vegans who are sort of culturally on the right, not because I think it's good to be culturally on the right, but just because I think it's important to separate the issue of animal exploitation as being bad from being.
I think he's right there, though. I do think he's right. Like, in terms of we need a broad base for representation.
I think he's wrong in the sense that this already exists. I mean, you can probably find a more represent, but I know many vegans in real life, and loads of them are just completely different people. I know many on the left. I know many who are right leaning, who have
Fulso does right wing as you can get.
I don't know his politics, except that he thinks socialism is, what did he say? So is evil or cancer?
Evil, yeah, evil and cancer,
evil
yeah,
and cancer.
Yeah, so he's very right wing, and he's vegan. He's one of the most vegan people I know. In terms of the way he considers animal ethics, he really does have a high priority of animal rights and animal-based animal ethics in general. So I don't know. Like, I think it is. You're probably right that it is already there.
I just think there's a clear bias towards
stereotype.
One side. Yeah. So it's like I would have taken that chance to be like, yeah, these people who identify with these labels do exist. And it's
moreover, if you believe that, like, there's let's bring in our father's philosophy into this in some respects. When you sacrifice your power in relation to, let's say, like a label, you are allowing an individual to define a given cause. You're allowing to define the stance for you. Now, are you going to reclaim that power, or are you going to submit to that power and say that, okay, well, I simply cannot be a vegan unless I conform to these norms? If you have a problem with it, then just be a vegan that is right-wing, or be a vegan who does wear a suit, rather than look towards somebody else to set the trend for you. Stand up and clean your room, man. Like, if there's something that's out of order, fix it.
Yeah, I've been complaining about that recently. That people will, find a label and think, oh, these people think and agree with this stance that I have, and then instead of being like, well, what do I believe on this different issue, it becomes, I'm a conservative now. What do conservatives believe?
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah, that's actually really talked about very well in the philosophy of cultural hegemony by what's his name? Antonio. It's not Guattari.
I actually know some.
No, I think it's. I think it might be. Is it Adorno?
I can't.
But yeah, now. It does. It's not really that important. But it's cultural hegemony is Gramsci. It's Antonio Gramsci.
And, oh my god! How did I forget his name? He was
I think
massive in the sociology books.
yeah, he has a great. He's a Marxist philosopher, but he makes a really good point. I mean, he was imprisoned by the fascists, for example, and he was like, "How do people become fascists?" And he's writing this from prison, in the prison notebooks. So like he's very well accustomed or introduced to people not necessarily thinking and rather obeying a power structure.
Yeah, I am familiar with Gramsci, actually. It's been a while since I was really up about hegemony, though. And I called it hegemony, which makes me, like, disgusting, really.
Yes, I agree.
All right, let's carry on.
Fringe woke phenomenon, which is what at least veganism
Yeah.
certainly is at the moment. Which is why I'm glad that you're willing to have me on to talk about this, because I know that the perception
can I
of
just say as well, just to quickly, I hate to interrupt again, but I know when he says cringe woke phenomenon, I know what he means, because I agree. Like, there is this kind of wokeism that's a civil religion that I think Carefree Wandering even brought up and talked about quite well. But there is the issue is that when you say that there is this cringe woke phenomenon and it is ill defined, it has no real cultural bearing without saying, oh, this is what is woke, and you give a kind of ostensive definition, then it does allow for a blanket all power play, right? You can just essentially categorize something as woke, and if people do not like woke things, then they'll hate it, right? And then that, if that, and I get what he's saying, he doesn't want that to happen with veganism, but I think that he needs to attack at the heart of the behavior that is going on there, which is really that it is an ideological power play. And don't get me wrong, I understand what that the people on the quote unquote like woke side are doing the exact same thing by categorizing things as prejudicial, as patriarchal and so on. I get what they're doing, the exact same thing, but you don't fight fire with fire in that respect. It's the propagation of vice. And I think that if you don't acknowledge that, then you aren't acknowledging the degradation of philosophy and dialectic to rhetoric. And I think that he needs to challenge that.
Yeah, and I just think with these terms, it is just like, it's like when people use words like propaganda. Now, propaganda does mean a certain thing, but when people say it, there's a different connotation, because the way it's as if the thing is like bad, or it's like, Orwell. You think of like 1984,
like Orwellian.
And it's like, well, actually, if we look at what propaganda is, it's not even necessarily like this bad thing. It has this specific narrative, so it's in context to what the narrative is, whether or not it's a good or bad thing. But people use the word. And then
there's the language game. There's the language game around it, and I think as well I completely forgot what I was going to say, actually, so it's totally fine. I'll just continue.
Sorry, go on.
Veganism is pretty negative. I mean, the biggest problem that the vegan community faces is probably a PR problem. And I guess I'm just trying to contribute to removing that problem. It's quite difficult to know why exactly it is that it's connected in that way. I think it's got something to do with the fact that people on the left and people who are part of this woke phenomenon are certainly more inclined to be in favor of radical revolutionary thought. It's something that it sort of gives them something to fight about, and this is what a lot of it's about. And of course, veganism is a wonderful example of.
I would say that in the sense that, if someone's like conservative, they're traditionalist, they're looking to kind of, it's kind of in the name, like to conserve. It's going to be people on the left, typically, I think, that are going to be more inclined to just make a change, or disrupt.
Yeah. Well, I think
100%.
I think it's like it unfortunately happened with everything. Conservatives are more likely to be on the other side in terms of slowing progress when it's needed.
Yeah.
Civil rights movements, for example, which conservatives would, I imagine, many of them will hail as just now, but this is the problem when we talk about conservatism and progressivism, which I think are really just nonsensical concepts in themselves. You conserve or progress based on a rational principality, not for any other reason.
Yeah, true. Because there are things that progressives are going to conserve, and I think I get what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, like why? What are you conserving and why? And this is I agree with the positive power of prejudice as outlined by someone like Hans-Georg Gadamer, but he is very well aware of the need to rationalize our traditions. So like veganism is, I don't think it's quote unquote revolutionary, but I think he's right. Don't get me wrong. I think he's right in saying that it does attract like quote unquote progressivists. But I think that they are the exact same people who often make excuses for themselves in relation to some sort of progressivist dogma. And I think that's worth bringing up. Like people, I often talk to woke people about going vegan, and they just victimize themselves to the point in which, oh, I can't go vegan because I'm such a victim. So it has. I think there's more of a pathology here of woke that we should which we should make clear about wokeism, rather than saying it's anything necessarily political. The political aspect of it is it's an ideology, it's a group ideology, it's a group pathology, rather than necessary. It's a civil religion rather than anything else. It's not about. It's about performing ritual and using it performing a performative ideology used to justify one's desires, rather than anything else. So when we're talking about wokeism, we should really be talking about the intentions behind the individual committing the act that we are calling quote unquote cringe, because it's not necessarily about achieving any sort of political goal. It's not about being a progressivist. It's not about making the world a better place. It's about achieving power and domination. And I think Peterson, to be entirely honest with you, points that out. And I think Zizek points that out as well. So like, and he's left. So it's not something that is even indicative of the left wing. I think you find people who are more likely to be left wing for that.
You do get like,
yeah,
no, I know what you mean. Like they're illy defining, what wokeism is, and they're just assigning it to the left.
But I think that's a real problem, because it becomes a rhetorical tool which can then be used to really undermine any cause that isn't conservative. Well, if you then you woke, and it becomes a label, and that becomes stigmatic, So I do think there's a problem with that, but let's try and not pause them too much, because we're only 6 minutes in. So we'll try and like power through.
We'll get to the we'll kind of go past this kind of bit, and then when they actually get into the actual pain, that's thank you for the tips, by the way. I'll go through them after the.
It's because you have this huge problem of animal exploitation in factory farms that definitely needs solving, and so it makes sense to me that this would be like, music to the ears of people who are wanting a social issue to fight strongly for. But I resent to see that it's often reduced to that this sort of, it's intrinsically connected to this wokeness, which wokeness itself has become a bit of a meme. It's not even clear exactly what it means.
There we go. That's good.
I guess I'm trying to sort of move the perception away from that and say that no, what veganism really is about, at least ethical veganism, or the kind of veganism that I would promote, is the rather simple proposition that if we can avoid inflicting unnecessary suffering, then we should do so. That's what it breaks down to for me. So, thanks for having me on to talk about it. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem at all.
That I think you really should start, like, to be entirely honest with you, Alex, I really wish that you would, I know what you're saying for me, as if that clarifies the situation, but I think you should point out that the dominant and most adhered to definition of veganism is not purely consequentialist. It has a deontological aspect, which is namely exploitation. That it's a philosophy and a way of living which seeks to exclude as far as possible impractical forms of exploitation and cruelty. So there is a virtue ethical aspect, there is a deontological aspect, and there is a consideration of benefit and harm within the definition, but it's not alone. You can't simply just say like veganism is about the reduction of suffering, because vegans do not, as a group, act that way. And if we are all using a definition, and it's worth saying that there is no such thing as a private language game. When we're talking about language, what vegans mean most of the time, the majority of vegans mean, are in reference to that definition. That's where most of us have come to veganism. We've come to veganism from the Vegan Society definition. And if the majority of the language community means something separate, then it kind of begs the question as to whether your definition pertains to the usage of the word. It sounds that you're really conflating what is a utilitarian, like a utilitarian proposition with a proposition of utilitarianism. Reduce the greatest good for the greatest number, or reduce or the least bad for the greatest number, the least suffering for the greatest number, which is more of a utilitarian proposition rather than veganism. I think that it's a conflation, and it's one that I think you have to acknowledge publicly if you are going to make that claim, rather than essentially allow us to all be characterized by a utilitarian ethic. And I mean, likewise, if someone was to say this about, if they were to it's a redefining, and I think that needs to be made clear.
Yeah, well, I hate to spoil it for you. Maybe you'll see it the way I see it, but I think multiple times in this interview and elsewhere, he makes it clear, oh, well, this is my view and people don't like it. But then he uses the term as if it's his definition.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really quite irritating because people aren't going to, draw that distinction.
I think as much as he has the right to claim the definition, I have the right, the right to say that this is what the word means. I have the right to say you're not using the word correctly. Mm-hmm. And it's for the language community to decide who's correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think part of the issue is a lot of people who are pushing veganism, from what I've seen, like the people with the viral videos online, I don't know if they're interested in veganism to reduce animal suffering or to make themselves appear as if they're doing something virtuous. Right?
By the way, the little kind of character attacks just kind of end soon.
Like that's the main goal of their veganism. So I think what you're doing.
I don't think that's not a part of anyone's veganism, though. That's actually a part of their conceit. Like for example, if a Christian, dresses as if they're poor, makes themselves look sick and ill when they're fasting, have no fear, for they have had their reward. The point is it's necessarily unchristian to be using Christianity as a means to an end rather than an end in itself. It's exactly the same thing for the principality of veganism. It's an ethic. It's not something that is used for the end for a separate goal. So that's avarice and conceit. It's not. Right. It's not veganism.
No, it's just like, and it's like, no shit. Like people will use like labels, especially ones that, connote virtue and stuff like that, in order to further their own affirmation. Like, so what? Like, people do this with everything. I just don't know why it's relevant. But anyway.
Well, I think that the reason that if I'm honest, I think the reason that it's being brought up is probably because of the way that Nietzsche would have observed ethics. This idea of it's an aesthetic ideal and it's used to gain power. It's used to forward an agenda, the will of a certain class of individuals. Now, I think that's necessarily incorrect. But I think that's why it's probably being made out this way. But then what needs to be made, I think, painfully clear then is that if we do take this approach, then all individuals who bathe themselves in virtue are of a class of manipulators, spitting poison at the populace. They're not necessarily indicative of the system itself. So, I mean, unless she's willing to say that the system itself is simply a manifestation of this virtue, what's it virtue signaling? Mm-hmm. But if she's not, then it seems to be, a character attack. It seems to be like a characterization.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me. That's how I'm viewing it, 100%. That's carry on.
It puts you in a different camp than what a lot of people are doing. And I think that's maybe where the overlap with wokeness is, which is there are some, I wouldn't even call them woke, but there are a lot of people on the left that are actually interested in equality and reducing suffering, really. And then there are people who are just interested in it so that they appear virtuous.
Yeah, but then, of course, that's a problem with any ethical issue.
Good lad, Alex.
It's difficult to separate those people who are doing it for the sake of really caring and those who don't. But equally because, if you do something long enough, especially if you make it sort of your job, so for quite a while, advocating for veganism and making noise about animal suffering was essentially all I was doing all the time, talking on podcasts, giving talks, this kind of thing. And it gets to a point where you're sort of talking very emotively about the suffering of animals, but you're talking about it so much that it's almost like you don't really feel it anymore. And so, I like to sort of take breaks and make sure that I'm constantly rethinking what I'm saying and not being, I guess, dogmatic about it. But I think, sometimes you might see people who...
I mean, I will say, I think that there's something telling when he says that in saying it, if he stops feeling something, then he's worried about dogmatism. Your feelings have nothing to do with it.
No.
And it's all reason. You could be entirely emotionally apathetic to the suffering of others, yet be an ethical individual in terms of, you realize their value. You could be completely emotionally detached and be like, for example, you could hold a Christian ethic and hold that, it is simply the right and wrong thing to do because of divine command or a divine law, and so it's kind of strange that you would put what should be a rational construction into the point of emotional consideration. I don't care what people feel. I'm not here to tell you what you should and should not feel, because that would be manipulative.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I've had days where I'm just completely like out of it, and I just quite desensitized, and I'm still, having discussions or debates with people, asking them to point out like the relevant difference between humans and animals, and that would justify exploiting and killing them, and whether or not animal rights is a logical extension of human rights. Emotions doesn't need to come into this, like, at all. I completely agree. So yeah, I didn't notice that the first time I watched it.
Emotions can also blind you from the truth. You might be emotionally invested into a tradition which might be unjust, or you might be emotionally invested into a notion of self-destruction, for example. You could be suicidal. It doesn't mean you should give in to your emotion. No. That would be following pathos.
Yeah, I don't know if this whole like introduction bit is just them kind of like, trying to be friendly with each other and using certain words that...
Yeah, maybe.
It might just be that.
As a philosopher, you say what you mean what you say.
Yeah, well, there we go.
Because though they're just doing it for the sake of it. They don't really care about animals. They're just doing it because they think it looks good or something like that. But I think that can actually often be just a result of the fact that these people are talking about it so much that you basically become insensitive to it.
Okay, I can see that. I mean, I've had that happen even just with me going on other people's podcasts talking about my health experience. Even when I went to Oxford and talked about my health experience, it's like at a certain point, I've talked about it so much and which is good psychologically. It's I've like desensitized myself to it, so it's not traumatizing anymore. But it also means that the emotions associated with it aren't like raw like they were, and it's just, yeah.
Yeah, I remember when you were in Oxford and we took a picture together and posted it on Instagram, and I got quite a lot of messages from my vegan followers and even my non-vegan followers sort of being like, why are you hanging out with the antithesis of the vegan movement? Because
I'm not the antithesis though. That's the thing. Is like I had an issue with animal suffering for my entire life. I stopped eating pork when I was like 14 because I figured, pigs
so this is the issue. Like, by the way, it's all going to be a discussion about suffering, by the way. So we're going to actively...
I've got that. I've got that. And I will say that there is something relevant to be said about, talking to people who are on an opposing side. I think that is valuable, and I think it's worth saying that even from like a Christian standpoint, for example, right? Who better to speak to than those who need to be saved, right? Like, are you going to go and preach to the choir?
Yeah, kind of that. Sometimes it feels like kind of a waste of time to be like... That's why what I do, I kind of like mix my intentions. Like, I try and offer some catharsis to the vegans, and then I try and fight some non-vegans. So
yeah, I think you've got to. That's the thing. You've got to kind of have a balance, I suppose.
Yeah, for the one's own sake.
They're the most intelligent. They probably suffer the most.
Yeah. Sorry, did you want to say something?
No, I'll just say even for the sake of the good itself, like build a community, an ethical community, whilst also challenging dogmatism.
Yeah, I
both externally and internally.
Yeah, I think I've got that down. I fight people even in here, so so yeah. All right, let's go.
And I don't have to eat that. I've always thought meat was healthy, and I think that's probably because my grandpa hunted, so it was like.
I love that, by the way. I always thought meat was healthy, and it's because my grandpa hunted.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all actually thought meat was healthy, right? I think it's a dogmatism we've all been raised to have, that meat was healthy.
By merit of it being hunted, of course.
Yeah, yes, of course. I think that it shows is maybe like a like a familiar investment, and it feels like she would have to condemn the soul of our grandfather, which is, I think, not true. Like, in many ways, you're saving them in the incarnation of the ethical improvement that all of our children necessarily make. If you don't have kids and grandkids who are better than you, then you've failed as a parent or a grandparent. And so, like, if you genuinely want to instantiate the greatness of your forebearers, do it in your actions. Do it in the virtue of your own actions.
I think a lot of people don't go vegan for that very reason, where they think, well, if I accept this is wrong, then I have to accept that everyone I love and everyone who I respect or who's been in my life is also doing wrong. And I don't think that's a pill people want to swallow.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's like my grandparents, obviously, they ate meat, dairy, and eggs. I don't think they were bad people. I think they were incorrect. I think that my ancestors, who were probably Viking raiders, weren't necessarily bad people. I don't think that's how we should judge individuals. I think we're products of our time, and we judge them by the standards that were, or the moral, or the ethics that was available to them.
Oh yeah, like
and
100 years from now, we'll be seen as terrible people, like just like
100%.
and consuming things that can't even be destroyed in our lifetime, and goodness knows what else. It's hard to see.
I truly hope that my ancestors see me as a villain in some respects. That there is something, like, not necessarily as a total villain and an evil, like a demon, but rather as in some way lacking, because I think that shows
progress.
Well, I think that shows, like, the teleological approach to the progression of history. If my descendants see me as the sort of, like, a triumph of moral virtue that they aspire to attain to, then I've probably made some massive mistakes. So yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, I really don't like that kind of, like, oh, you got to respect your elders because they're right. And it's like, if I did have kids, I'd want them to be much smarter and much more self-aware than I am. Otherwise,
I mean, there's one thing about showing respect to your elders and valuing, like, wisdom, like phronesis, but there's another thing in showing undue reverence or dogmatism towards history as a debt that can never be paid, right? And I think that's something that Nietzsche talks about, a historical debt which can never be paid, because then all you've really done is enslaved your descendants to a tradition from which can never be justified. And what you really want to do is inspire the capacity to reason for themselves. Create an adult, not a child.
Yeah, that would be nice.
In my family, but I mean, even since carnivore or lion diet, I've tried to be careful about where my animals are from, and I have enough money that it's not difficult for me to source meat from farms that raise the animals in, like, the best way I see possible. If you are going to end up killing an animal, at least not factory farming, right? So,
but that's so, like,
I know.
But why would you say, like, why would you start with a half measure where if you are doing something which you recognize has an unethical outcome, and you talk about doing it in the nicest way possible, it's like, why would you wouldn't approach any other ethical issue like this. Imagine if you were to try and say, well, what's the most ethical way I could beat children? What's the most ethical
Why would
way
you do that?
that I could rob others? There might be an answer for that. There might be a genuine point where you could come to the conclusion, like, if there was a murderer, then he would be someone like Dexter from the TV show, only killing murderers. But you would also conclude that does not justify murder.
Mm-hmm.
Surely.
Yeah, and I just don't understand, like, that's to even, a lot of granting goes on here and I think people who think that, like, as soon as you take the factory farm out of the equation and you make sure that it's a free range local murder, that suddenly it's fine. Like, and I'm just like blown away by it, because it's like, well, my neighbor is so local to me and they're very free range. I've seen them leave the house. I don't know how that would suddenly mean that I could, like, determine their existence and, exploit them and then kill them. Like, that's just bad in itself. I just don't. How's that better?
I mean, well, like, look at it like this. What if I was to see let's say I see an old lady. She looks like she's in a lot of pain. She clearly hasn't got many years left, and she's just hobbling down the street every day. And I see her. She's lived a good life. She's lived a happy life, and now our life is coming to a close, and it's of a net utility which may only be neutral at best. So I might as well kill her. Yeah,
might as well.
I think might as well.
Yeah, and she's local, so
she's local. She's free range,
organic, probably.
Yeah,
I'm definitely on board.
She's definitely not nothing's organic anymore.
Reduce suffering, and I think that helps. Factory farming is also an issue for the environment as well, right? And it's just certainly that's not a comfortable way to live. And if you watch, like, anybody who watches videos of factory farming, it's like, that's not good, right? Nothing about that looks good.
Yeah, it seems like everybody knows this.
Does she say that there's something good? Did she say that when she sees a deer get shot through the head, that there's something good in that?
Yeah.
Like, even if there was an aspect of goodness, there's an aspect of goodness everywhere, right? If goodness is the privation of evil and God is omnipresent, then there is an aspect of goodness everywhere, even in the depths of hell. But that doesn't mean that we should lower ourselves to that level.
Yeah, and it's just like, do they not understand that even at these smaller farms, these animals still end up in the slaughterhouse? Or, like, on site they get killed. Like, I don't know. Oh, that's terrible. I've seen this footage of these animals having their throats slit. It's terrible. It's like, yeah, for all you know, that animal could have just come from, like, Betsy's farm. They're getting their throats slit.
Speaking of which, actually, a great example is even a smaller scale slaughterhouse that was investigated by Joey Cobstrong recently, where they basically sawed the head off a cow without it being stunned.
Yep.
So, like, it's not just because it's smaller scale, just because it's what appears to be more ethical, doesn't mean it actually is.
No.
And even still, like, what do we even mean by more ethical? It seems to be ill-defined. If it's just suffering, I think it's nonsensical to look at suffering as an innate negative anyway, and also antithetical to the philosophy of Jordan Peterson, and certainly Nietzsche. The idea of suffering being valuable in its own right and not in relation to the meaning produced by one's actions, that's absurd.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm just trying to think, like, with Cosmic Skeptic, maybe I haven't thought this through enough to say with, like, certainty, but couldn't he make the case that, like, it would actually be good to kill animals in factory farm settings because they are experiencing such tremendous suffering? They're just taking them out, very early on, because they are essentially babies when they're killed.
Yeah, but he would also argue that they shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Well, he says something in this interview, actually, and I can't, but we'll see, and maybe it is applicable, but you can see when it actually plays. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but yeah.
But it's worth bearing in mind that something like, I want to say over 95% of animal products consumed, I'm not sure about America, I think it's higher, I think it's something like 98%, but the vast majority of animal products consumed come from factory farms. Of course, if you ask people on the street, do you eat meat or something like this, and they can tell that you're sort of maybe going to raise an ethical concern, they'll often say something like, well, yeah, but I try to make sure that I get it from the best kind of sources. I know that there are people in the world who do this. There are a lot of people. But at the same time, I find it quite a mystery that pretty much anybody that I speak to about this will say, yeah, I try to make sure that my meat and my animal products come from ethical sources. And that makes up the vast majority of people. And yet it is simultaneously the case that the vast majority of our animal products are coming from factory farms. I'm not sure that people are being either totally honest, or maybe they don't quite understand the breadth of factory farming and the grasp that it has over our food. Of course,
how do you feel about the kind of concept, because I've teetered with this, like that it's the betrayal aspect. So if we really have this kind of situation where you see these like cows roaming free, they're on lovely grasslands, they're just chilling, living their lives, and then you kill them, like, can't an argument be made that that would just be worse because they were in a situation where they were experiencing a really good life and the suffering wasn't present, and then their ability to even exist was just reaped from them? Like, I'm wondering how to navigate that.
I think I'll just listen to some more and then before
Okay.
speak.
If you're really tracking the food, if you've got your own farm or something like that, then it's easy enough. But if you walk into a supermarket or a restaurant or a fast food chain, into a KFC, into a Starbucks or something, this is all factory farmed. And the real strength of the vegan movement is against factory farming, right? Like the reason that I'm sort of like getting up on a soapbox, as it were, and trying to...
Like, I think
he means in terms of number, but I don't know.
I think the strength of the vegan movement is against animal exploitation, right? Like that's the goal. In all of its forms. That's why vegans avoid stuff like puppy mills.
I was going to say, like, they'd still exist if there weren't factory farms. Like
animal exploitation is not something we condone in any form.
No.
It's a sentientist movement. We are trying to make the social norm the consideration of sentience, not an anthropocentric ethic. Not what I would argue is an unjustified metaphysical foundation for ethics. We're trying to essentially cure dogmatism. It's not based on simply one unethical expression of vice, right?
Yeah, I think like through this conversation, when he's saying this, he's thinking of it in terms of, he's like calculating all the number of all these animals. He's looking, how many animals will suffer, and then if we like target factory farming, then that's our biggest focus because then the least suffering will come. But that's not the goal of veganism.
No,
so
it's quite similar to saying like a human rights activist was to eliminate, let's say, the the exploitation in places like Saudi Arabia. But no, if you're being abused by, let's say, some sort of injustice in what would otherwise be a fairly just state, no, that would be a human rights violation. It would be wrong, and human rights activists would consider that as necessarily needing to be solved. Like, it's not something that may have the greatest moral pertinence when compared to a more pressing issue, which might be like a genocide that's occurring somewhere else. And obviously you could argue from a pragmatic point of view that activists should put their efforts into that domain, but
the work's not done.
To say, but the work, it's not finished. Like, until so long as that exploitation is occurring, then we aren't done we haven't finished what our goal is. We haven't actually completed our end.
Yeah, just it gets worse.
Proselytize about this kind of thing, vegangelism as it's sometimes called, is really because of the plight of animals in factory farms. If we were still doing farming how we were a few hundred years ago, it would still be an interesting ethical problem to solve. There'd still be, especially if we have alternatives available, there'd be an important ethical question.
Ethical problem to be solved.
Yeah. And he does this multiple times during this interview. He's like, factory farms gone, it wouldn't be a problem.
Like, let's say we're killing animals at a rate that was like 100 years ago. I think we are still looking. Bear in mind, 100 years ago was still industrial, so that's one of the things. Like, people were being. There was still like Bernard Matthews was one of the pioneers of industrialized farming, and I'm trying to remember when he was around. Was it like 1930? So like we're talking like let's say 1950s. So I think maybe it's 100 years ago it wasn't industrial, but or it was only just becoming industrial in terms of the way it was developing. But I think even if it wasn't, it's irrelevant. It seems pretty clear that the problem is like, why is it that if there is one person in agonizing pain who's being murdered, and then two people,
problem.
at what point does it become a pressing moral issue? If it wasn't an issue with one person, why is it an issue with two? Why is it an issue with three? And why? Where do you set the threshold for this, Alex? Like, at what level of suffering does the suffering become relevant?
Yeah, it's only when it's I don't know where he puts that, because all of the animals who are just killed beforehand, just for families, or who are used and exploited in wars and killed as a result, or sacrificed. Interesting kind of idea. But factory farm, that when that was introduced, that's when it all became a problem. Like,
yeah, I mean, like as you say, like I think it was like in World War One. I think it was something like, it was a ridiculous number, like 8 million horses were killed in World War One.
Yeah.
And that was about 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But but even still, like, it just seems like, if I hear about one child being beaten, it doesn't. That's wrong.
Yeah.
It's not an interesting moral problem. It is a moral. It's a moral issue. If people are beating children, it's something that we need to solve. If there's child beaters if beating children is the norm, but it's not industrial, it's still a problem.
Yeah, I
don't have to lock kids into some sort of, like, I don't have to farm children and beat them for it to now become a problem. It's a problem if I'm beating children at all.
Like, exactly.
But I think that this is unfortunately, I think, utilitarianism shining through.
Yeah, like, I don't understand utilitarianism properly enough to like have a fair view, but it seems like when I hear like people who are utilitarian talk, it leads to some really bizarre outcomes that I just, like, from the outside I'm like, well, how do you, like,
Intuitively,
navigate? Yeah, I just don't know. But then there's some people who seem to be able to navigate it well, and I don't know.
I think utilitarianism doesn't work because it requires a rational principality underneath it for it to function, and it has no way of justifying that. It's a problem that's been apparent within utilitarianism since its onset with Jeremy Bentham, who tried to use an egoistic foundation. So you already have to have some sort of meta-ethical foundation in the first place, which it cannot really be derived. Where are you getting the greatest, if everyone equals one, and why? What is valuable about the one in the first place? But I will say, even utilitarians do agree that one person being hurt versus 0 people being hurt is necessarily worse. So it might even be apathetic on the part of Alex, not rather than even utilitarianism.
Yeah, is it more the failings of cosmic skeptic?
Yeah.
Oh god, we'll find out more.
So whether we have the right to breed animals into existence and take their lives away from them and inflict
Oh, sorry, help me navigate that, because he's, how he says humans, I might be misquoting, but I'm pretty sure he said that humans don't necessarily have rights, or neither do animals. So when he's talking about someone having the right, is he talking about a completely different thing? Because to me,
I think he thinks an ethical right is derived from as a form of principality from, like, as in a rule utilitarian. I think.
Okay.
But I'm putting words in his mouth in some respects.
Yeah.
I'm not, unless he was to clarify, I wouldn't know.
Okay, right, let's carry on.
Certain sufferings in their life, but it certainly wouldn't be the forefront of my campaigning. It wouldn't be the main thing that I spend my time doing. It's really about the factory farming, which is why I say when people were surprised
imagine, I cannot imagine that if 8 million horses were being killed, and I'm just, it's not going to be the forefront of my campaigning. What will be, and why? It seems that it seems, and as if there would be an issue with that, as if you dedicate your life to helping, let's say the Uyghur Muslims, right? Or let's say you dedicate your life to helping the people of Ukraine, right? Or let's say you dedicate your life to stopping homelessness in a region which doesn't even have the most homelessness. Let's say it's somewhere like let's I don't know, like, let's say somewhere like Newcastle. There's homeless people in Newcastle, but it's not the worst place for homelessness. I think you're doing a very lovely thing. I think you've got a just cause there. And I think that it's only utilitarians who do this, where they look towards creating the greatest possible impact in their actions. Otherwise, their action was incorrect. And I think that's nonsensical.
If that's actually the case, it seems kind of like it's just like a way to be like, I can get people on board with this because this is just so massive they can't fight against it.
It's not even that. I think that the reason it's like that is because the moral standard of utilitarianism in some respects is actually higher than anyone actually realizes. But the problem is that this standard is often unachievable from the average individual. So for example, the average utilitarian would not be okay with a lot of modern behaviors.
Right.
Like, for example, eating non-local produce, or earning without giving, let's say, like 80% of your money to charity. That would be the real utilitarian. Peter Singer says this, but he says that since people won't do it, we're going to construct a somewhat arbitrary goal that he thinks people will do, will eliminate poverty, and that'll be 10%. So that's why the actual obligation in utilitarianism is insanely high. So the idea of being apathetic to a single notion of suffering is not a utilitarian stance anyway.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I don't know enough to I know there's some people in the chat who are like utilitarians who'll be mad at you, but carry on.
I mean, even if you were the antithesis of vegan, like to take a picture together, I mean, it's hardly the most incriminating thing in the world. But I got that impression just from talking to you then as well, that at least ostensibly we're both against, let's say, unnecessary animal suffering. And that's what the vegan position, in my view, essentially reduces to. Now, you're right to say that there's an environmental problem as well. That's actually not something that I talk about very much, because I think that more people are going vegan now for the environment rather than the ethics, which, sure, it's kind of admirable, but it seems to me like it sort of misses the point ethically. It would be as if we were sort of stood on a hill and we saw this factory in the distance. It was like a puppy mill that was breeding and torturing puppies and forcing them into cages and disbudding them and this kind of thing. And you said, oh, this is so terrible, we need to end this. And I said, yeah. And you said, I mean, just look at the fumes it's emitting. It's so bad for the environment. It's like, okay, you're not wrong, you're not incorrect about that, but I feel like you're sort of maybe missing the ethical point here. The real motivating factor of all of this for me is the suffering. But look, we have an animal suffering problem in factory farming, which on its own, in my view, I've said this a few times before, on its own is a good enough reason to abolish factory farming and probably go vegan. There's an environmental case against factory farming because they're just absolutely disastrous to the environment, which again, on its own, the environmental case would be good enough reason to abolish factory farming. There's also a pandemic prevention case. I did a TEDx talk about this, that while our governments were telling us to keep as far apart from each other as possible, we're simultaneously cramming tens of billions of disease-ridden animals into these ridiculous, ignoble hellholes to share their diseases with each other. And just
It's funny though, because it's not just factory farms that can produce this risk. So even with this regenerative agriculture, that would still be a potential problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, it does increase the risk of, obviously, and he is right about that, obviously, but it is in general, for example, the common cold, flu, tuberculosis, smallpox, these were, polio, these were all derivative from animals, and engagement with animals. So usually it's argued that it's probably animal agriculture. It's very unlikely that you are in proximity of a horse for it to sneeze on you, unless you work with horses,
Yeah.
So it is really, it's not limited to factory farming, but it is pretty limited to animal farming.
Yeah. So yeah, it'd still be a problem, but
exponentially increase the risk of them developing into a zoonotic disease with the potential to infect other human beings. So the pandemic prevention on its own, when our governments say they're doing everything they can to prevent this kind of thing happening again, it's like, give me a break. As long as factory farming is still on the scene, it's an absolute joke. That on its own is good enough reason to abolish
factory farming, though, as you said. Like, it is going to increase. Like, for example, the wet markets weren't factory farms.
No. And yeah, with the flu, I'm pretty sure that was from like a camp that some soldiers set up. Like,
but it's like the wet markets that COVID was. Look, COVID probably came from a lab. I'm not going to say that it didn't, because I think that there is fair. Like it's very coincidental that there just happens to be a lab right next to the wet market, like a virology lab. And I'm not being like conspiratorial because I don't know. I doubt I'll ever know. I doubt I'll ever know. But it's a genuine concern that's being considered by the authorities, and if they come to a conclusion from a point of expertise, I'll take heed of it. But in the meantime, it was clear that a risk. It was also clear that there was a severe risk with the hygiene of the wet markets, but they weren't factory farms.
No, they're not factory. No.
So it just shows you that these are exotic animals that are being slaughtered. They're not being farmed in the scale of cows, chickens, and pigs. But they do have they do carry the risk of zoonotic diseases. So
yeah,
it's not just factory farms.
Yeah, exactly.
Farming. Antibiotic resistance. Most people know that antibiotic resistance is the big fear of the medical community. But the majority of antibiotics that are sold are used on livestock, not human beings, right? And so this is driving your antibiotic resistance. So what you have here, and there's also like health concerns, but I think that's a bit more technical. So but just take those four, right?
Look, I think it's also worth noting that it's environmentally worse to have free-range cows.
Yeah, she doesn't seem to think so, and they don't seem to challenge that in this.
No, because it is one like it does not help with soil erosion. That's an absolute myth. And then two, in terms of the land needed is so much larger, which requires which will require increased deforestation, which is the destruction of carbon sinks. So like for God's sake, it's very clear that burning down the Amazon rainforest is not good for global warming, but that's what you're going to have to do if you're all demanding free-range beef, because there's nowhere to put it. There is nowhere to put the cattle. It requires I think five times more land. So yeah, multiple planets worth of land at the demand that we have. So it's absolutely unfeasible.
Exactly, and it's
suffering case, the environmental case, the antibiotic resistance case, pandemic prevention case, which each on their own is enough reason to abolish factory farming, right? But we have all of them together on one side of the scale, and then I ask people what's on the other side of the scale. For most people, it's a sausage roll. It's milk in your coffee.
Well, I see that's
bacon in the morning.
This is where we disagree, and I think this was brought up with some of the people on the vegan side for the Oxford debate. One guy was talking about, how do you weigh pleasure? How do you weigh suffering against the pleasure you experience eating meat? And what I would argue is, especially in America, I think the major cause behind chronic disease is diet. And I think that a plant-based push is going to make people sicker. And I think removing meat from...
Yeah, I know. No evidence at all.
That's an empirical claim.
It makes me
I think that a carnivore diet, I think the lion diet that she promotes is necessarily unhealthy and conducive of chronic illness. And I can back that up with mechanistic data. I can back that up with clinical trials with cholesterol, with people taking cholesterol and how it relates to heart disease and heart attack risk. I can talk about clinical trials in relation to the absorption of heme iron with increased calcification of cholesterol, with increased calcification of cholesterol within your arteries. So you can actually make arguments in relation to this, even if you haven't got even if you didn't have the highest form of studies or the highest form of evidence available, at least present some. But if anecdote is, it's
pain.
It's useless. You could be insane. I don't know. You could be every time you could be having a psychological reaction to a notion of a plant, and I wouldn't know. And you might conflate that with a physiological response. But you might simply feel, you might have a phobia, for example, and it's causing you anxiety. But that doesn't mean just because your heart's racing that it's necessarily true that carrots are they elevate your your cardiac have a cardiac response. So I think it's anecdote is, I'm not saying it's useless, it helps us understand maybe where to look into,
where to go
and
next,
we should, and doctors should listen to patients, but until there's some sort of peer reviewed study, it's not science.
Yeah, and it's just so I hate how she just kind of inserts doubt into her audience all of the time, because it's quite the contrary. Certain plant-based diets have it's been suggested that they are preventative in some of the leading causes of diet-related deaths. So it's like we can demonstrate that it's possibly the case that what she's calling for
And there's
is
a
actually,
strong empirical basis for that as well.
but she then just
I
wants to
mean,
be like, yeah, but you can't trust it, and you're going to be so mad at Cosmic Skeptic for what he
but
says.
why can't you trust? Like, if you're saying like, why can't you trust it? Like, why should I trust you over this? Even if the study is flawed, a study is at least a study. It has parameters, it has limitations, and it expresses those limitations, and we can observe them and can conduce new studies from that.
Mm-hmm.
An anecdote is nowhere near as valuable as a bad study.
Yeah.
So even if the study was flawed, it's better than what you have.
Yeah, and somehow people take what she says. It's just
people's diet. I don't think we understand the repercussions of doing that. So it's funny because everybody who's concerned about this is concerned about suffering on some level. So animal suffering, right? For people who are more concerned about the climate, I think they're basically concerned about human suffering, right? Because if the climate gets all screwed up, then eventually that leads to human suffering.
I think that it's so mistaken to say that people are necessarily only concerned about suffering, that they are concerned about the well-being of individuals and their suffering in some respects, but they're concerned about that in relation to their value as an individual. Someone like Tom Regan's a deontologist, he's a Kantian. He's not arguing for animals, the consideration of animals because they suffer. He's arguing it in relation to their value as moral subjects. And so that this just simply shows the ignorance of ethics more than anything. To say that would be implying that we're all utilitarians, but we're not. We're not even close.
Yeah, like for me, like you could put an animal in the most perfect condition, give them a stroke every day. They could possibly never even experience suffering to a degree that I would see as like bad or anything like that, and you could kill them, and I would still think that's wrong. Like,
yeah, exactly.
So,
exactly. You could argue that like that they were not given the opportunity, and certainly in terms of her father's own philosophy, I will imagine. I'm going to assert. I'm not positive, but I'm willing to bet that this contradicts her father's own philosophy. Her father's philosophy is based off the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, and Friedrich Nietzsche argues for that suffering can be conducive of a good life. To embrace suffering can be good if it produces a higher sort of individual who manifests themselves. To produce meaning through suffering is better than to not suffer at all. So it seems that, and I'm willing to bet that our father will not say to avoid suffering all of its forms and produce and engage in pleasure, because that's a hedonistic principle which he himself condemns.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know how much of her views she agrees with her dad on, but
well, no, but I'd like to see the debate.
Yeah,
Mikhaila versus Jordan.
Let's
make it happen.
Let's go.
Suffering, and what I'm concerned about is just human suffering. And I know, and I'm biased from my experience and from what I've seen for people who've gone paleo and kind of gone back to ancestral eating, is being chronically like I would
eating
stop
as well. Like that's like can we just point out like ancestral eating, from the anthropological studies I've seen, our ancestors were eating 100 grams of fiber a day from fossilized fecal matter. And that's an incredibly high plant-based diet. That is nowhere near like didn't her and her dad have like reactions to apple juice? If we're talking about like how much fiber and how much plant matter our ancestors were eating, they were not carnivorous. There is nothing to support. There is no evidence to support that our ancestors, survived primarily off of hunting. There is far more evidence to support that they survived primarily off of foraging and then farming. Aristotle even points this out in the Politics, where he says most men gain their food from tilling the earth, and that was 2,000 years ago, for the onset of more industrialized farming methods, clearly. But even in the language that we speak, right, the words for cow, chicken, and pig, for example, have a Germanic origin, because the Saxons who lived in Britain, whilst the words for for example, like beef. Beef relates to the is French. It's French for cow. It's boff. So that's because we were invaded by the Normans. Well, I'm saying we. I'm actually the product of this invasion in some respect. But the Normans invaded Britain and dominated the Anglo-Saxons, and so the Anglo-Saxons would talk. So it became the norm to talk about the product in French, whilst it became norm to talk about the animal in Germanic, in Saxon, in Old English. So the language itself shows a class-based divide. The majority of the population spoke about the animals and animal products in relation to who was consuming them, which was not themselves.
Classic. Yeah, History 101 with Pippi.
The suffering of somebody who's chronically ill. And I don't even, like, animals don't even cross my mind. Like, that amount of suffering compared to a human being that's chronically ill. And so I think that's where we might differ, unless I'm...
It's weird as well, like, because I don't know what she means when she says chronic illness, because there's a spectrum of, like, the suffering that one feels as a result of a given chronic illness. Like, for some people, it can be some joint pain. For some people, it can be, like, don't even get out of bed and anything like that. And it's just, like, weirdly...
It's ill-defined.
Yeah,
it's illness?
Like, I don't even know what she suffers with to this point. Like, she's very vague with it herself.
Yeah, what illness? I mean, fuck, to be entirely honest, these could be psychosomatic symptoms. I don't know. I don't know what you mean. Like, am I to just simply trust that you are experiencing what you believe you are, or that these could be manifestations from your desire to be a victim? I don't know. And believe me, it happens. Like, it's not uncommon for people to have psychosomatic symptoms, for a symptomatic response from a psychological foundation. That's one of the reasons why you have to control for these things in trials. Like, you need to understand, even if someone's like, I'm in a lot of pain, maybe you are, or maybe the pain is a manifestation from something else. What's your pain? What's your pain tolerance like? How do we judge this in relation to the broader population? Like, there's so much to be unpacked there.
Yeah, and when we put it in the human context, like, you know, if I'm suffering my worst illness ever, we have a hospital full of people experiencing extreme suffering. Is it justified for them to violate the rights of others? If it meant with a click they could stop that suffering right there and then? Like, maybe people, you know, descriptively would end up doing it, but would it be right? I'd say absolutely freaking not. But yeah.
Let's just. We should probably try to power through. I think we're probably,
let's do it.
Potentially, I mean, it requires a bit more digging. For a start, you said that you only care about human suffering. I don't clarify.
Only care. That's not true.
Right. That's
if
what
we can reduce
clarify.
Like regenerative farming, and I've advertised this quite a bit. Hopefully, I've talked about it on my podcast. We should be making a move towards regenerative farming, and the more people that buy meat from regenerative farms, the more likely regenerative farms are to take off. But I would rather see a push towards regenerative farming than towards veganism, because I think those are going to have major health repercussions that we can't foresee at the moment, or that we are foreseeing but not attributing to less meat.
Yes, on an animal suffering.
Wait a minute. She thinks that we're consuming less meat as a society that has produced more meat than it ever has. We're talking about an industrial farming mechanism which produces meat to the nth degree. And she thinks we're consuming less meat.
And she's just sowing the seed of doubt. That's all she's doing. Unexpected repercussions.
But
you know,
I'm just wondering why she thinks we're consuming less meat as a population. And if we were, then we should see these health outcomes in vegetarians and vegans. But what we see is a reduction in all-cause mortality, and a reduction in chronic illness. Like, in terms of chronic illness, vegans in the Adventist vegan study had the lowest rates of chronic illness. So why would that should be the inverse of that? So I'm just wondering where she's gaining this insight from.
Her asshole. Quite frankly, I think.
The farming and to be entirely honest with you, regenerative farming as well, that's a bit of a meme.
You like can have a lot of base regenerative farming, as far as I'm aware.
But it's regenerative farming. It's not that the concept is a meme. It's that in terms of what they mean by regenerative farming, often means grazing cattle, and grazing cattle is not good for regenerating patches of land. It's actually degenerative.
Yeah.
So it doesn't actually aid the goal, so to speak.
They're talking as well then about things like crop rotation and stuff like that, aren't they? Which would then need so much more
Yeah,
resources and land
you could
and
go like you could no, well, it's like you could go you could do organic farming. You could do something permaculture. There
yeah,
is alternatives. You could do vertical farming.
yeah. But no, like apparently it's just have them like 1 acre here and then go to the next one yeah, just kill me.
Yeah, Mike the
factory
vegan. Just
farming.
shout out Mike the vegan, because that man is a trooper on like debunking a load of loads of this stuff. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, okay. I'll have to watch that after.
You're still going to run into an ethical qualm when it comes to taking lives that don't need to be taken. I guess I'm a bit more relaxed than most vegans, and I don't even like using the word vegan because people are sometimes upset with exactly how I use the word, how I define it, or the situations in which I think it would be permissible to eat animal products. A lot of people have told me that.
I don't think, Alex, you understand language if you think that you can simply define words
Define
as
it.
you come in,
Yeah.
as you please. That's not how it works. That's like, to make this into maybe a woke issue. I am a woman as I define it. I just want everyone to know that right now, this is what a woman looks like, and if you disagree with me, you're wrong.
You're trying to trigger everyone in my chat with all these things you're saying.
No, this is like words aren't defined from an individual basis.
Well, yeah,
They're
this is
defined
private
from
language, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's philosophically incorrect. You should know that.
Yeah, I don't understand half of what he's saying in this. It just seems so counterintuitive, but
it's potentially misleading. Really, I just have a commitment to minimizing animal suffering. So, coming at this from an ethics perspective more than a practical one, I quite simply just grant the conditional, right? If it is the case that this is going to minimize suffering, then that's the right thing to do. So if it turns out, let's say, that sort of hunting is actually a better way to procure our nutritional requirements, because of course we could eat plants, but plant production, plant agriculture requires killing animals too, and it's possible that in some circumstances hunting an animal might kill less animals and it might actually be less painful for that animal. Like, I don't know about the practicalities of that. I don't know, but I'm just willing to just grant easily that if it is actually the case that involves less animal suffering, then that is the thing to do. Now, most people define veganism, at least the Vegan Society defines it, as a minimization or an exclusion to the highest extent practicable of all forms of animal exploitation. I like to use the word animal suffering there, and it means it's got a slightly strange implication, which is that if veganism is just excluding animal suffering to the highest extent practicable, then even if you are killing an animal for food, if you're doing it in such a way that genuinely minimizes to the highest extent practicable all forms of animal suffering or exploitation, then it's not just that you're permissibly breaking veganism or something. Like you're doing the vegan thing according to the ethical definition.
I hope he applies this to all other forms of ethics as well. Like if you are killing, like, so for example, if it would reduce suffering to be a cannibal in a scenario, that would be the ethical thing to do, to kill someone and eat them. So, for example, to find chronically ill people who are, for example, on life support, you would reduce the material needs of the society whilst consuming an animal product. I know that there are health negatives, obviously, to consuming human flesh, but I'm just saying hypothetically, you'd have to bite that bullet, and if he doesn't bite that bullet, then he's being essentially hypocritical.
Yeah.
Of course, vegans shouldn't be under the illusion that we're not responsible for any animal suffering.
Yeah,
of course we are. We need to. Most people know about the problem of crop deaths, right? Like the animals are being killed in the production of plants. Of course, vastly more plants are currently being used to feed to livestock, and so the best way to minimize even just crop deaths is to eat the crops directly, because it takes less crops to feed a human than it does to...
You would say that to actively exploit another versus accidental harm. So if you're a deontologist or you're a virtue ethicist, you would still argue you'd still say the same thing about plants and crop deaths. And in fact, the deontologist and virtue ethicist, I would argue, would have a stronger foundation to stand on. Yeah, in that respect, because then you would say, it's about the consideration of the other.
Yeah, like if I had to, like if someone said to me, look, you could stop like 1,000 accidental road accidents of human beings. All you have to do is like intentionally mow someone over or get someone else to do it, you know, take me out of the equation. I couldn't say, yeah, I'll do that. I'll intentionally like mow that person down just because, like, to stop
Well, it's
accidental.
you couldn't even just say that. I think the most clear cut issue is organ harvesting.
Mhm.
You know, things like that where you can benefit. Let's say you were to cure like 5 people from a degenerative illness. I remember Alex actually saying as well, like, just to pull this up, you know, he brought up the novel The Ones Who Walked Away from Omelas. And at the bottom of this perfect city where people live in harmony is a child who's being tortured immeasurably. So like, they are faced with an unbelievable, excruciating existence. And he said that he would walk away. And that's the concept. Like, the suffering of the one does not justify the pleasure of the many. Now, surely this would be applicable to this very point. Like, you would say that, you know, the suffering of the one isn't justifiable. But I guess he maybe would be consistent with that. I don't know. I hope that he still holds that point.
Yeah, we'll see more. I think he hashes it out a bit more.
To feed livestock. But in other words, like, if you think that veganism means that you don't harm animals in the production of your food, then what are you eating exactly? You're probably going to be starving yourself. And so even for the vegan who eats nothing but plants, we're still contributing to some animal suffering. We just recognize that by eating the plants directly, we're contributing to a lot less. So we already grant the idea that to be vegan is just to minimize animal suffering to the highest extent that we can, which means that if there were a situation in which the way to minimize the amount of animal suffering was to go and, you know, shoot the elk, then go and shoot the elk and call yourself a vegan for all I care. I'm just interested in the ethics of minimizing suffering here.
That was great. I like that.
Even she's laughing at it.
Okay.
Of course you do.
I brought you
just
on to
pander to your audience. That's the...
talk about a few things, not just veganism. That was good, though. I liked that last bit a lot. I'm in agreement there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we agree more than people think that we do. I mean, your condition is different as well. Your situation, I mean to say, because of the fact that, like,
don't you fucking dare! Do not give credence to that chronic illness bullshit. Because everyone will have chronic. Oh, I've just got chronic illness. I can't do it. No science behind it. No actual reason. But if he does that and just says, oh, face value, I believe that your condition requires you to drink salt water, then you are a mug. Like, that comes to, I'm sorry, I shouldn't even be losing my professionality there, but you do not listen. Like, come on. Like, like, people like, there are people out there who want to eat dirt, who believe that drinking their own urine is good for them. Like, the health norms of the modern era are laughably bad. Like, a keto diet was described, which was unbelievably popular, you know, was described as the most dangerous diet trend of the 21st century. People were doing raw pea or frozen pea diets and stuff. You know, people believe mad stuff about health, right? Absolute mad stuff about health. And why should I believe that just because our father's a psychologist, that she does not believe? Actually, I'm sorry to say, but anyone who argues for drinking salt water is probably an idiot in nutrition. Like, you're drinking what is equivalent to something that is dehydrating you. Like, you are dehydrating yourself in taking fluids. I mean, like, it's like saying, I'm sorry to say this, but I think it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous to even, if he says that, no, you have to consume the bodies of others because of your health condition. I'm sorry to say that I would only take that as the case if you prove it to me that there is something wrong with you, that there is a genuine reason that you can point to and say that if I did not do this, this negative result would happen. If you don't, then why should I believe a single word that comes out of your mouth? You could be just absolutely BSing me. And to be entirely honest with you, people do this all the time. I've seen it happen at Joey Carbstrong. Somebody said they had a potassium allergy, I think it was. And then he was like, well, why should that stop you from being vegan? You know, do you eat plants? They're like, yes, I do. Yes, I do. You know, like, it's like, right, so you just eat a low potassium diet. If you, let's say you've got an issue with fermentables, you go on a low FODMAP vegan diet. If you've got an issue with, I don't know, like, there's so many things to be considered here that in terms of individual diets, okay, yeah, make it fit you. But like, I am yet to hear of a genuine health concern that alienates people from veganism, to be entirely honest with you.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, on the kind of other side of it, I think the fact that like chronic illnesses are not taken I think it's only like a few months ago that EDS was something that the NHS recognized, and that's like a terrible chronic illness to live with. And I think like people like Mikhaila have had struggles in their life, and then it's like led them to be like, oh, no one's listening to me, then I can't trust these doctors and whatever. So I think like it's also the case that she could just be, you know, as you've like mentioned, just fucking saying whatever. And to be honest, like, to put in my personal attack, I don't really believe a word that comes out of her mouth. I'm not gonna lie, but yeah, I don't know what would.
It's just I just don't think it's a good way to even approach veganism. Is just to say to people like, you are the special case.
You're fine.
Everyone wants to be special, man.
Yeah.
Don't give them a way to be special.
No.
Oh, I can't be vegan because I'm special. Will become the dominant dogma of our time.
Yeah, like, yeah, people want to do that and be like, oh, well, it's not, you know, for my blood type, or, you know, for my, you know, I'm just built different. It's just like, no, just establish the thing that, you know, would actually mean, oh, you are magical and you can't actually be part of this. Or otherwise you're just, it's just, what is it? It's just bollocks. There you go.
As far as I understand, like, the reason why, I mean, it's funny, your diet will be more restrictive than mine is.
Can I just say as well, it'd be worth mentioning as well that you'd have to bite the bullet on saying that her existence was morally a moral negative, that her continued existence producing suffering was morally negative, and not that she's obligated to kill herself, but that it would be better if she killed herself. That would be that's a utilitarian. You'd say, like, you know, that's how utilitarianism works.
You're gonna make Trevor
you know, like,
mad.
like you know who said this? Peter Singer said this, right? In my discussion with Peter Singer, I said, if you're stranded on a desert island and all you can do is consume animals, should you starve to death? He said, it would probably be for the best if you died, or, like, you know, if you starved to death or killed yourself. But I don't expect people would do that. He's like, I wouldn't do that. So you would say, no, it would be better actually. In many ways, Mikhaila, if we massacred you, but you and all people with your chronic illness, if that's the reality of it, that would be a utilitarian.
Oh, Peter
Vegan,
oh my gosh, yeah, it's awful.
Which is quite strange, but of course there's a world of difference between your sort of average Joe who like eats KFC because he thinks it tastes nice and animals are here for us to kill, bro. And somebody who says, look, I just actually need this to survive and be healthy. Like, these are different justifications.
Wait, no, that's ridiculous. You're utilitarian. There is no difference. There is absolutely no difference for you. Like, if the consequences are equal, there is no difference. How can you even say that? Like, how you're a utilitarian when you feel like it? If you're taking a consequentialist approach, it's consequences. It's only consequences. I don't care how people feel. I don't care what people think. Like, that's the crack. Utilitarianism isn't like, oh, well, you know, like, you know, it's different when people are like this. No, it's not like that.
Yeah, because he doesn't make the distinction seemingly. I mean, he said he hasn't really thought about it, but surely he should really have thought about, you know, crop deaths versus like intentional throat slitting. Like, surely, surely that would be different. Like, because you could think, oh yeah, well, we need to actually eat food. Like, and we need to make something, so we'll go with the least, you know, the one that causes the least deaths, even if it will still cause deaths. Now, surely for him, yeah, I don't know. He confuses the fuck out of me. I'm not gonna lie.
I just think that, like, you'd have to be I think you'd have to be boldly honest and say, like, your existence is an ethical negative. I'm sorry to say that. Like, it's like saying, like, if let's say I was a vampire and I had to just murder people to survive, I'm sure I'd be willing to say my existence was an ethical negative. But is it different because they're animals? Because that's normally the way that he tests it. He says intuitionally, as an intuition pump, he switches animals to humans. So if she was a vampire, would you be saying, oh yeah, it's different? You know, you're not just one of these psycho killers. You're a vampire. And that means that it's okay to murder people.
Yeah, he'd have to be okay with vampires and anyone who like needs to. Yeah, if they need it, then yeah.
It's a need. It's not a want anymore. But I mean, it doesn't make sense from a consequentialist framework at all, because intentionality isn't considered. That's the point. That's consequentialism. Not the only time intentionality is considered from a consequentialist framework is in relation to the production of a greater amount of utility, or from an act of reasoning itself. And so if he's making an argument which is like, maybe play him, because he might be making an argument that is like from Henry Sedgwick or something. But we'll find out.
We'll find out. Okay, yeah.
Into the definition of veganism is practicability. That's kind of the operative word. So like, of course, if it were going to like, when somebody says it's not healthy to be vegan, the vegan response is usually, well, yes, it is. Like, look at these studies. Look at the scientific consensus or whatever.
The evidence.
Like, vegans generally don't say something like, well, I don't care if it's unhealthy. You have to do it anyway. Right? They say, no, it is healthy, and that's why you have an obligation to do it. But the implication of that, the corollary, is that if it were not healthy, if it were genuinely not healthy and not sustainable for you, then it would be permissible to eat animals, and that's a position that I hold, and I think is a position that's embedded
relatively
into the
so. I mean, you could say that if it was relatively unhealthy. So if it was, I remember him saying this to me, I think if it shaved like a couple of years off your life versus, you know, let's say it led to your death within 5 or something like that, there's a big difference there. So, but yeah, like, there would be an argument to be made there. But I think the point that vegans are making is that it's not an argument in and of itself. It's a refutation of an argument made by an alternative party.
Yeah.
Definition of veganism. So if you look at the definition of ethical veganism, look at what it's actually about. It's a lot more sort of inclusive and relaxed, I think, than might be represented by certain vegan activists that you might see on the street screaming about, you know, drinking milk under any circumstances. It's just about minimizing suffering, which most people are already committed to.
No, it's not.
Okay, I like it. Now, normally at the beginning of each episode,
I can't keep saying that. I think I'll just end up hating the sound of my own voice if I just say like it's not. Yeah,
just to reiterate, what Alex thinks veganism is not what veganism is.
It's not what it's defined as, and it's not how most people use it.
No.
Who they are and what they do, but we just kind of got into it.
Sure.
If anyone hasn't figured it out by now, can you give a brief background about who you are and what it is you do?
So I'm a vegan. Which it's actually amazing that I haven't said that yet. That's usually, it's not even how
it is actually amazing, because we've been throwing vegans under the bus for a little while now, haven't we? We go around screaming when we do our advocacy, by the way. Like, wow.
Introduce myself on podcasts. It's just how I introduce myself to anybody. It's the first thing I say before my name. My name is Alex O'Connor, and I'm something of a reluctant vegan, actually. I started life on YouTube making videos about the philosophy of religion.
You're right there.
I just feel like I don't really like calling myself a vegan. I'm a reluctant vegan. You know, people don't like the way I use the word vegan. I'm a different kind of vegan. I'm a special. I'm a
coming
special
in and
vegan.
Changing it.
I'm not an ordinary vegan. I'm a cool vegan.
I'm a cool one, yeah. And I wear suit and ties. And by the way, I'm really reluctant to even be.
I'm not one
vegan.
of those woke vegans. I'm a cool vegan. I'm not an ordinary mom. I'm a cool mom.
It's so funny because when he's giving his speeches to vegans, he's apparently so proud, and you know, like, well done, guys. Yeah, it's pretty pick me, isn't it? It is pretty pick me. So hopefully, Alex, if you see this, the pick me behavior, we need to grow a spine, all right, babe?
No, I think Mike the vegan. Like, I'll be fair. I like Alex. I like him, and I think, to be entirely honest with you, I think I know what you're doing, man. I think you're trying to appeal to people who you think hate were, but don't agree with them hating were, and join their side.
Like come on,
that's not helping. I know that you might think it's helping, but it's helping you. It's not helping. You're throwing the rest of were under the bus.
It's
I think Mike the Vegan summed this up really well. He said the virtue that vegans need the most is gumption.
Mm-hmm.
You need courage.
Yeah. Yeah, it does take a lot just to be like, actually, no, I think every single one in this room is wrong about this.
It's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. It is horrible. You got to do it. Otherwise, like, otherwise it just goes unspoken. But yeah.
Religion. Quite embarrassingly, really. I started when I was 16, 17, something like that. And so some of the older material is just embarrassingly poor. But it's been interesting to sort of be able to track this philosophical change and growth. So I made videos about the philosophy of religion, which moved on to talking about philosophy more broadly, and then ethics. And then people kept kind of asking me, just as like a fringe issue. It was sort of like, people would ask me about abortion or euthanasia or, capital punishment or veganism. And I thought, I'll get around to all of these. And one day I finally decided to sit down and read Animal Liberation by Peter Singer, which is to this day the greatest philosophical defense of the vegan position that exists. It was written in 1975. And, well, philosophy is perennial. The first chapter, it reads just as well today. And I just remember thinking, like, I must be missing something. It was so straightforward. And so I made a video on my YouTube channel saying it was called A Meat Eater's Case for Veganism. And I said, look, here are some arguments that I'm considering. I think these lead towards the vegan position, the vegan philosophy. Please, for the love of God, somebody talk me out of it. Please. I really not only do I want to change my mind for the usual reason of just, intellectual consistency and self-challenge, but because I actually really don't want this to be true. I'm a big fan of KFC in particular. I should say taste-wise, not morally. And nobody could. And it's funny, in that video in the beginning, I said in the introduction, oh, don't worry, everybody, this channel isn't becoming like a vegan advocacy channel or something like that. I'm just making one video. It's like, whoops. But it's because nobody could talk me out of it. And so since then, I've become something
credit.
of a
I
sort
at least think that at least he talks. I will give him, credit where credit's due.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that Alex does try to convince people to veganism, even though this isn't. I don't think this is of all the things that I think Alex has said and done. I think he said some good stuff. Some stuff I disagree with, but this is I don't think he's your finest hour here, Alex.
No,
this isn't.
Definitely not. He didn't strike the balance in this of like appealing to the crowd while actually being like, yeah, but wrong though. But I mean, he says a few more things.
We'll all have these moments, man, as well. Like there's times
Yeah.
when I've been overly antagonistic. Like it's a hard line to follow. It's difficult. It's no one's saying that vegan advocacy is easy. So I'm not gonna say like, oh, I can't believe you messed up one time. So, but let's see how it goes.
Yeah. Well.
A vegan YouTuber speaker, so I'm invited to do talks and podcasts and stuff, and it's probably the main thing now that I talk about. But it happened essentially by accident.
When was that?
That was 2019, April of 2019. So not sort of that long ago, actually. But I mean, it feels like it's been forever. And even in that time, like my position has wildly changed. I mean, it started with this case of like, wow, I had no idea about any of this. I'm just going to put a hold on all my animal product consumption until I have a bit more time to sort of work it all out. And I've spoken to people from, it's the great thing about being a podcaster, having an opportunity, as you'll know, to be able to just speak to so many wonderful, interesting people. So I've been able to speak to ethicists and dietitians, and I've been able to speak to psychologists about the nature of pain in the brain and how it works and this kind of thing. And so my sort of position has been consistently evolving, but not once have I come close to doubting the idea that if we can avoid inflicting suffering upon an animal, then we should do so. So the main thing that changed my mind on that was an argument. It was a sometimes called name the trait, which basically asks, there are a few ways to word it, but you might want to ask something like, okay, so 86% of pigs or thereabouts in the UK who are killed for slaughter are killed in gas chambers. So they're forced into metal cages and lowered into chambers of carbon dioxide, which is, I mean, you can watch it on YouTube and you can see it's a pretty painful experience. It also like acidifies the liquids in their eyes and mouths. Okay, so this is pretty gross. Now we would recognize that if we were to force human beings into a gas chamber, that would be wrong. In fact, it would be evocative of one of the worst evils in human history. And so the name the trait argument can be surmised as saying something like, well, how like a pig and in what ways would that human have to be before you'd be okay with forcing it into a gas chamber. So you name the trait. So some people say that, well, pigs are far less intelligent than humans are, and that's why we have more moral worth. So, okay, so the trait is intelligence. So let's take a human being and let's lower their intelligence. Lower their intelligence to the state of a pig. So let's give them like the tiniest cognitive ability that you can imagine. Can I force that human being into a gas chamber off the back of that? No, in fact, you'd probably consider it more evil to do that on the justification that they have a low intelligence. Okay, so what if I gave the human being like 2 new legs instead of arms? Can I force them into a gas chamber? Well, definitely not. What about if I made their skin pink? You know, is skin color the relevant factor here? Well, definitely not. Okay, so you can essentially metamorphize this human being into a pig. You can say, well, let's take this human being, give him...
arguing for the form of name the trait that ask yourself now denounces.
Oh, yeah. Didn't you speak to him about the strong interpretation versus weak interpretation or something like that?
Yeah, like you can't metamorphize a human into a pig, and so like the idea is already a preloaded value. But yeah, like there's a historicity.
I find it weird that he brings this up and then he says things that I just don't think he'd accept in the human context. That's what I find weird. I'm not gonna lie. Oh.
4 legs, pink skin, curly tail, intelligence level of a pig. You know, experiences the world as a pig, suffers like a pig. Can I force this human being into a gas chamber? And it seems like you never get to a point where you say, okay, now we found the justification. Now it's okay. You can put this being into a gas chamber. But you end up with a creature that's identical to the creature that we started with, which is the one that we force into gas chambers. And not to win a war, not to buttress the economy, not to build infrastructure, but because we think they taste nice. And it just seemed ethically obvious to me. And so I thought I must be missing something if this is still such a sort of fringe minority view. And so the past few years of my life have been an exercise in, you know, trying to get people to talk me out of it.
I think
you should talk
it's worth mentioning that the original argument is name the trait, quote unquote, is the argument for marginal cases, and it's what is the moral relevance, what is the morally relevant characteristic, the morally relevant difference between an animal and a human, which would justify unethical, no consideration in terms of ethics, or reduced ethical consideration. So like this is like I think that's the better argument there is that it alludes straight away to better ethics and to say like why do we consider a human more valuable than an animal? And that's where I think the conversation should usually be.
Yeah, same. I use morally relevant difference every single time. It's my it's my one phrase that I could just like automate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To Diana
I mean, it's not like a massive thing, but I think it is a thing. It helps.
Yeah, I find it really helpful. It's much easier.
Rogers, because your argument makes sense if meat wasn't, I think, necessary for health, and I think.
And she can prove that.
I think that there's a lack of studies. I think that the studies are there. And I think Diana Rogers, who's a dietitian, who does, she wrote The Sacred Cow, and she's very interested in regenerative agriculture, regenerative farming. But I think your argument would stand if it was just about taste and if we could get all the nutrients from a vegan diet. But I think that the long-term, I don't think long-term
back on nutrition and show that it is, this is where I think, you'd bring up what's she called again? She brings up she kind of goes a bit bad and talks about vegan allyship and stuff. But that psychologist who talks about that's it.
I knew it the minute you said that.
Yeah, it's like natural, normal, and necessary.
Yeah.
If she's arguing from a place of she's arguing the three ends, natural, normal, and necessary throughout this, and that's the foundation of a dogmatism. It's like the foundation of like why are there slaves? Because it's natural, normal, and necessary. How is it natural? How is it normal? And why is it necessary? And that's I think what you've got to say. Like one is normality a justification? No, it clearly isn't. Is something being natural a justification? Well, do you just mean natural occurrence, or is it something indicative of nature itself that must be manifest for a notion of completion and goodness? And if so, point to it and why. And then if it's necessary, to demonstrate the necessity. And I think that these are the kind of things that you have to do when you talk to someone like this, or talk to people in general. People have the conception that they need animal products to survive, and it's our job to demonstrate they don't. That's what we need to do as vegans.
Yeah, I mean, even when we demonstrate it, there'll be people like Mikhaila who are just like, I'm not sure though. But yeah, the more that we have, the merrier.
Veganism helps people. And that's like mostly what I've read online, anecdotes, and then studies. I also know that if you put really, really young kids on a vegan diet, that can be really hard on their brain. But if they eat animal products, it's not. So I think your argument.
But why? Where's the evidence? Like, where are you finding this from? Is this something you've heard down the pub, or is it something that I can go and look up and see it in a credible scientific journal that's being peer reviewed?
I think
Like,
pub, mate.
like, look at it like this. Oh no, like what you've got to understand is I've made a vaccine, right, and it works great. I feel great every day. I inject it into myself. You should inject it into yourself too. What would you say to me if I said that? You'd be like, you are mad. You are mad. Right, like or like even something like that's bloodletting. Bloodletting was a historical practice done by many physicians. You are bleeding out viruses, right? You are bleeding out the sickness, right? The issues. Of course, it's wrong, and we know it's wrong now, but we only know it's wrong because we've tested it. But it intuitively, it has some level of intuitive or an intuitive grasp on people, because many physicians used to do it. I think they would open people's jugulars, for God's sake. There would also the average person would have it done to them. And would you say that from this place that, like, well, people say that you shouldn't let blood, and I've heard that it's bad for kids when they don't let blood. So we should keep doing it.
And
because
I
anecdotally,
feel like there'll be repercussions in the future if we don't, for our children. Think of the children, PP.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. It is the defense of dogmatism itself.
Yeah.
As a philosopher, this should be repugnant to Alex.
Well, spoiler alert, he doesn't push back. There's no pushing back. So
argument would stand true and would be impenetrable if meat wasn't such a health food.
Yes, and of course,
you cannot let
you're right,
meat a health food. No,
he allows too much. Okay, he pushes back too few times. I literally think I might be wrong here, but I think he pushes back kind of on the food thing, like the nutrition side, once. So that's be great.
But the science is still very much in its infancy, and we must be careful. Okay, like this is really important. If there is a risk that this is actually really not nutritionally adequate, and we're feeding it to children, not really knowing what we're doing, and essentially blinded by what becomes ideology. It merges from just a commitment to minimizing animal suffering to an allegiance to vague principles that are sort of followed no matter what, because they're just sort of thought to be true by a community.
Then would be as bad as meat eaters.
Yeah, we'd be as bad as Mikhaila especially.
Like the thing is that what you're doing that is exactly what happens with animal products. That is precisely the reason why parents feed animal products to their children. There is no other reason. So it's at least say, well, what happens when, like, why are we not risking? Like, the point is that the risk occurs no matter what we feed our children, right? And so you feed them based on evidence, right? You don't feed them based on dogmatism. That should be the point, right? And he should say that it equally applies to animal products, because it does.
Yeah, but they're besties, clearly. He can't push back on anything.
Then we run into problems. As I say, I'm sort of willing to grant this conditional claim that if it's not actually healthy, then not only is it sort of morally permissible to not be a vegan, as it were, but to basically eat the minimal amount that we need to be healthy and still call yourself a vegan. I mean, we could probably do away with the word. It wouldn't be very helpful. But of course, it's worth bearing in mind that if it's the case that we think, okay, well, meat is required for a healthy diet, or at least animal products of a kind, sure, but this, of course, doesn't give us license to overindulge. And it doesn't give us license
No. Before we talk about how much you consume, Talk about the scientific reasoning behind it. Say, like, are you basing this off anecdote, or are you basing this off an evidence-based approach? And where is the evidence? Let me review it. I want to see the peer review. I want to read this. I want to see the studies. I want to see the scientific community looking at it and actually trying to produce truth rather than engage in dogmatism, right? Like, that's like fundamentally what this should be about.
Agreed.
Like, you can't just say like, oh well, yeah, it's like, oh, like people say smoking's good for you, and if smoking is good for you, if I accept smoking is good for you, then there's a difference between smoking and over smoking, and that's what you have to understand. And so maybe smoking's okay, and maybe we should get rid of anti-smokers as a notion, and instead just talk about the minimization of smoking. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, that is, it's tautologically true that if it was better, that it would be better, right? Like, I get what he's kind of saying there, but it's worthless. It's pointless. You're allowing someone to presuppose that their way of life is necessarily more conducive of health in infancy. But why? There's no evidence for that. There is evidence to say that a vegan diet is healthy at all stages.
Yeah, but it's weird how Alex is equally as skeptical. He's gonna make the claim, I'm spoiling it, that we should be skeptical of the position of like the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics, NHS. He seems to have equal skepticism, no, more skepticism towards that than he does with Mikhaila's claims and beliefs. So, but you'll see it for yourself. Okay, I don't know what he was thinking during this.
Procure these products from factory farms. I mean, even if it is the case that we need these products in order to be healthy, there is simply no excuse, none, for what we're currently doing to animals, for what is, as I say, essentially an overconsumption problem. The numbers involved are just like...
What?
No, it's not an overconsumption
What? It's essentially an overconsumption... What?
It's a problem of rights violations. Like...
Yeah, it's a problem of evil. Like you cannot say, oh, well, it's not that child abuse is wrong. It's that we're doing it too much. Like, it's just like, it's not like rape is wrong, murder is wrong. It's just that the numbers are too high. Let's bring those numbers down. Look, if there's only one rape in a day, I can accept that. Someone gets raped every day. That's okay. And it's just a numbers game. Of course, that would be absurd. Everyone would say you are insane for saying that. They'd be like, no, one rape is too much, and whoever did it needs to be punished. Like,
no, Sandra, like your kid Reese, like it's not the problem that you hit him, it's that you do it like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Like, at least give him like a break on Wednesday, okay? Like, let's reduce that. Let's bring that down.
Yeah, like you need to be an abusive parent, but do you need to be an abusive parent all the time?
Yeah, the problem isn't abuse, it's the overindulgence in the abuse.
Absolutely insane.
Man.
Unthinkably huge, especially when you think about sea life, which is just the most incredible. Sometimes I like to say, I don't quite know how to get it across, so sometimes I just say, since I started this sentence, around 150,000 wild fish have been caught from our oceans, which is roughly 4 seconds. And in the space of 2 minutes, that will have risen to 3.6 million in 2 minutes, right? The numbers involved are huge, but also the lived experience of these animals, pigs forced into gas chambers, cows being separated from their calves. Everybody knows about this kind of stuff. It's
not good. You should talk to Diana Rogers. Like, she makes a good case. I watched her. There's also a documentary she did. It's called Sacred Cow. And she talks about how it seems like a good alternative if we're to continue eating meat. Because I'm in agreement with you that factory farming, well, basically what I tell people who watch my channel is, and I give them a bit of more leeway. I say, buy the best you can afford. So there's like companies like White Oak Pastures that are doing a really good job. And like there are companies out there that are doing regenerative farming. Buy from those guys if you can. A lot of the people who follow me have autoimmune disorders or trying to get out of them and are really sick. And they're like in bed And so for those people, I'm like, do what you have to do to survive. And then once you get better, which is kind of what I did, because I didn't have very much money to begin with. And I just like...
But there isn't even evidence that exists for these like specific, like chronic illnesses that would entail better health outcomes if you, consume the lion diet. This is why I don't understand.
I think he's just picking and choosing what he's pushing back on, because he should really be saying like, no, actually, you should not. There are things that you should not do to get better. If you're getting better means harming others, that's a utilitarian. There's a point in which utilitarians are actually, no, it'd be better if only I am sick. That would be a utilitarian, right? If you're gonna be like a utilitarian, at least be the Giga Chad utilitarian that bites the bullets that you need to bite, rather than what is fundamentally a deontological take. At least, you're making a point of principality that the well-being of the individual can supersede the value of the many. That is fundamentally not utilitarian. You need to bite that bullet. You need to go like, no, actually, actually, if there's certain illnesses that if you were sick and it was going and treating yourself would kill and harm others, no, you should probably kill yourself. Spicy, but like that's utilitarianism. That's one of the reasons why people don't like it, because it doesn't come across intuitively. It asks everything of you. This isn't uncommon, like for people to really call out. I mean, utilitarians recognize this, that the moral calling of utilitarianism, if you'll pardon the expression, is to be a saint in some respects. It's not to pick and choose based on your own preferences. Right, it's a form of objectivism. Of ethical realism. Mm-hmm. There is a right and a wrong, and it's separate from your preferences, from your interests, and you have to sacrifice them in relation to what is right and wrong. So if your interests and your preferences are conducive of a moral negative, well, guess what? You have to divide them. That's the crack. And he should be saying that, but he's not going to say that, because that would make him seem a little bit crazy. But it is a little bit crazy.
It's funny as well, worth mentioning that people are mentioning white oak pastures, which is apparently someone who Mikhaila Peterson recommends. And recently there's been a notice of suspension for them because they've been found guilty of inhumane treatment and practices towards their animals. So this is supposed to be like the best kind of standard and brilliant. But yeah, if you read the notice of suspension, I think it was they were goats, and one was found with like three bolt gun wounds in their head, suggesting that they'd been bolt gun multiple times, and they were still screaming in pain after they'd been bolt gunned. So it's like almost as if even in these instances of the small local, the act of taking someone's life is going to be brutal, and if you objectify these and commodify these animals, then people are going to see them as a product and treat them as such.
It's also conducive of risk, right? Like even if you were to say that the suffering itself was only that which is morally considerable, you are risking suffering which you would not otherwise have to have. So even if you could do it in a way that didn't produce suffering at all, but had the risk of suffering, you have to now justify taking that risk with another. So like, for example, if there was a way to, like, it's like, for example, if I was to speed on the road, it's like I mightn't necessarily hit anyone, but I'm creating a risk which I now need to justify. And it's like, and I think that's at least you need to talk about, like what happens if bolt gunning goes wrong? What happens if this animal is not stunned? What happens if the individual who's killing them are having a bad day and they decide to beat them to death with a pipe because they have severe psychological issues from killing animals on a day-to-day basis for a living? Which is, to be entirely honest with you, very well documented.
Yeah.
This is, and even from a class-based approach, people seem to take it out on the animals because they feel like they're being underpaid, and animals are the property of the corporation, of the company. So it's like, even if all goes to plan, even if if it all went to plan, it would be okay. You have to bank on, actually, what if it doesn't go to plan?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's a good way of thinking about it.
Got off my medication, got better, and then now, well, I've been eating, grass-fed whatever for like 3 years. But
Whatever.
you should talk to her just to see if she can like poke any holes.
Yes,
Like how
I have come.
She couldn't say it. She couldn't say like grass-fed. She couldn't say the animals.
No,
she couldn't.
she's like, whatever.
Just grass-fed whatever.
Whatever.
Yeah.
It's
I
just-
just beat free range whatever.
Whatever.
I just rape free range whatever.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
whatever, man. Whatever.
The
Yeah.
victim, when we're talking, in animal rights, so often does the victim not get addressed.
Yeah,
like,
or like it's just objectified, dehumanized, made into something secondary to what they are.
Mm-hmm.
That as if that purpose is, to be consumed, and so you've already defined them in the act of consumption.
Mm-hmm. Just brutal.
Come across her work. I may have read the book actually, or at least I probably own a copy somewhere at the very least. But yeah, you're quite right. There's one of the PR problems that veganism has is one of being quite unempathetic for a movement that's supposed to be grounded in empathy.
One
I
of
think
the
it's
PR
worth
problems
remembering.
right now is freaking you.
It's so funny as well. Like, we really want to talk about vegans being unempathetic when we're talking about up to 1 trillion animals being wiped off the face of the planet every single year.
Sorry that I'm really sorry that I'm not being supportive of you and your problems when I'm talking. It's like imagine if people were saying this again for the civil rights movement. Like, you just okay, I think civil rights. I think people arguing for civil rights aren't really being empathetic to my plight.
Yeah, God, someone think
what about the slavers? Did you think of the slavers? How am I gonna run my cotton farm now that all the black people are free? Right?
Yeah. Oh my God,
Did you think of
me.
that?
Did you think?
Someone? I mean, did you even consider? Did you even empathize with me? I mean, what about me?
What about me? And like, I'm so sorry. that I have limited empathy towards someone who says they have a problem, hasn't got evidence for how they could solve the problem, but claim that this thing would solve the problem. But to solve that problem, their answer is rights violations, and they can't even substantiate that would actually help it. Like, I'm sorry that like my empathy is quite limited there in comparison to like looking at animals just having their lives dictated and then taken from them. Yeah, like, we're the ones with the empathy problem. Yeah, of course, Alex.
I think it's just a wise even like I just think it's he's just willing to make us look shit whilst not even pushing back on such like something that's so absurd. Like, he's just described beings like pigs being gassed as basically being burnt from the inside out. And screaming in death, and he's seen that footage, and he's wondering why I'm not empathizing with the person that has to give up bacon. Like, well, no, man. Like, actually, most of me consideration is of the person who's being essentially tortured to death. Like, fuck, I must be some sort of asshole.
Look, if you see someone like beating the living shit out of a dog in the street, and you have to like push them or like punch
and he's
them,
hurt his foot.
Yeah,
and he's hurt
like,
his foot. Am I gonna be like, oh, but he's hurt his? I'm like, are you okay, mate? The
mate.
dog's like limping around. Oh no, mate, you hurt your toe.
Nah, man. Oh God, guys.
When I say that veganism is about minimizing animal suffering to the highest extent practicable, people think about, okay, so if you're an Inuit living in northern Canada and it's genuinely really expensive to import vegetables, okay, fine, eat the meat because you can't afford it. But I think we need to be a bit broader in what we encompass in terms of practicability. So I like to encompass things like, for instance, sometimes I get messages from kids who say, like, I really want to try this veganism thing, or at least sort of minimize my diet, but I live at home and my mum cooks my meals for me.
I'm just going to point out, have you ever heard a vegan who says that like a child is responsible for what their parents buy?
No, never.
No, neither have I. I've never heard that once in my life. I've never.
No.
Every single vegan, from Earth and Ed, Joey Cobb Strong, to like, okay, I understand you don't have control over that. No one expects someone to take responsibility for something they can't control.
No. But yeah, weird. They keep bringing up children. It's like this whole emotive thing. It's like, oh, they like to talk about, like, think of the kids here.
Vegans just don't care about the kids.
They
That's
don't
the
care
problem,
about the
man.
kids.
Like, we just don't care about the kids.
I love being thrown under the bus, like, all the time.
That's
like,
it. We're being thrown
God.
under the bus.
Yeah, sorry, I've sorry.
We are just. It's the thing is that he's not even just throwing. Like, to be entirely honest with you, he's not throwing us under the bus. He's throwing the animals under the bus so that he can look in the, or like try and appeal in some respect to people who will necessarily hate him.
Yeah.
Right? Look, you, to be entirely honest with you, you know what that leads you to anyway. It leads you to being essentially, bitched at by these people. Like, I'm sorry to say, like, you have to have a spine. Like, people will not respect you.
No.
If you know, if you're gonna tell someone that they're doing something wrong, just say you're doing something wrong. Necessarily, this is wrong. You are being unethical. Have a spine. They'll respect you more for it anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
She doesn't want to hear it, and they're really stressed out. They're like, but I don't know what to do. Like, I can't refuse to eat this stuff, and I'm just like, relax. Like, it's okay. Like, this is the kind of thing that I think is included in practicability. Like, sure, okay, technically you could, like, you know, say screw you, mum, and you know, steal some money and go down to the shop and buy your own food or whatever. But like, no, I think it's fine.
Who in reality has ever said that? I mean, Earthly Dead's like talking to some kid like, yeah, but have you thought about a life of crime?
Well, he's about to say something that really actually agitated me. Like, hang on.
To her, about it over the dinner table and say why you're not particularly comfortable with it, and maybe it will get her to change the cooking a little bit. But it's certainly not unethical to eat that food, right? And so the practicability requirement...
It still is unethical. Like, this is like, no, an action's still unethical. Like, even if you're engaging in it and you don't really have a say over it, it's still like an unethical thing.
I don't think so. I think you could probably say that if you... No, I would probably say that if you were left without a choice, I would say that would be considered in terms of practicability or impossibility, you know, like, but like from a deontological standpoint, it would be like it would be tragic. It would be it has a negative, and I mean, he should still say it's unethical because it's consequential. But from a deontological standpoint, I would say, like, principally, your intention isn't to cause harm; it's to preserve your own life. It's the rule of double effect. It's like it's the same thing with abortion. If you're having to have a late stage abortion because otherwise you would die, it's tragic, but it's not unethical. And that's where I would say, like, I would argue. So I think he's right in saying it's not unethical to consume it if you have no choice. If you're being forced in the situation, but I would say, like, you should emphasize, like, yeah, do actually talk to your parents and point out that what they're doing is unethical because they do have a choice.
Yeah, I'm applying it too closely to the example because, like, yeah, kids don't have a choice, but I'm thinking too closely to, like, when I was younger, I probably had more of a choice than I thought I did, but I didn't push it enough. But I think that's my own kind of like, oh, I should have probably done more and been like, fuck you, I'm leaving. I should have done that. And then, you know, it's like unethical in that. But yeah, no, if you don't.
I think as well, like, I'm not saying children should be slaves to their parents, but children should respect and honor their parents as the authority over them, as the moral authority over them, even. I mean, there should be, like, the parent should be promoting independence, but the child should also have respect for their parents' decisions.
Mm-hmm.
At least until the point in which they're independent.
What if they give their child a gun? They're like, right, we could play shoot 'em up, okay? You're my moral authority, Dad. Whatever you say.
I think it depends on the age. I think
if
a
they're
child
6, then fair enough.
if the child like knows that they're breaking the law, then they know that their parent is not being a moral authority anymore. But when it's something that is ethically more nuanced, I think that changes. Like, I think if you know that from, like, in relation to the social institutions you've already been brought into, that your parent is going against the state, then you realize that the state that your parent is being unethical, and that the state contains laws and conventions that you may have to consider, or that you necessarily have to consider, especially the laws. Like, it's not something that there is a moral obligation there that holds us all to. And if you're aware of that, then fair enough. But I think, like, in terms of anything that's more morally nuanced, where it would be the reasoning of the parent versus the reasoning of the child, I think the child should, more often than not, show respect for that parent, until the point in which they are independent. But the parent should foster an ethical child, and that if they're raising their child badly, then that is not virtuous, and the child should also try to actively promote their own independence and become more independent. So they can say, like, look, I disagree with you. I think that your reasoning is flawed, and here is why. And I would say that's what they should do, but also respect the judgment and the will of the parent as their guardian.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm wondering, should I bring this up to 1.5 speed? Because they're talking quite slowly.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I haven't got all the loads of time tonight, annoyingly. Otherwise, we could do a big boy stream.
I think should be considered quite broadly, and so it would include things like
Jesus Christ. No, actually, okay, Jesus. I'll have an aneurysm. Yeah,
like living
1.2,
1.25.
1.25. Okay, he speaks faster than I. I thought he was.
Things like eating disorders, definitely things like autoimmune diseases, especially if, as you say, you're sort of bedridden and your life is falling to bits. Like, that's pretty much the definition of impracticability, which I like to remind people is embedded into the definition of veganism. So it's all about empathy, and we need to remember that
now it's about the definition of veganism that's embedded into, but all the exploitation that's embedded in there. Oh no, that's just a choice.
Yeah, that's just. That's what I don't get. Like, he just teeters between
pick and choose.
Yeah, that's why sometimes I just don't understand what he's going on about, and I think, oh, is this just his kind of like system? And it's like, well, no, actually, it can't be his system, because he keeps picking and choosing. How is that a system?
I don't know.
It's just a fleeting feeling in the moment.
Be empathetic to those too, and understand that people will put their health interests first. So this is the interesting thing, and why I thought it would be interesting to talk to you, because I think that we,
is that right?
At least on the sort of philosophical principles, let's say, are roughly in alignment. I think our different life experiences have probably shaped how we think about the practicability of eating meat. I mean, living in a city like Oxford, it's the easiest thing in the world to pop down to the supermarket and buy meat alternatives, and I don't have any serious allergies or anything like that. So, it's sort of easy enough for me to say,
allergies.
Everybody stop eating meat.
For fuck's sake, man! Like, come on! Even if you have allergies, just don't eat the thing you're allergic to. I mean, that's basic, right? Like, I'm allergic to soy. I would suggest not eating that then.
Yeah. Good thing.
The plant I'm allergic to. Like, I knew there's someone who works not far from me, who's basically a vegan, because of their allergies. They were a vegetarian, and then, well, not a vegan, but they're basically a plant-based diet because of their allergies. They can't eat so many animal products, and they're allergic to so many things that they can't eat dairy, they can't eat eggs, they can't eat, they can't eat so many animal products. And I'd like to point out that lactose intolerance is the number one most common allergy, in the world. But they can't eat lactose allergy rather. But they can't eat these things, and so they end up by default eating a plant-based diet. Why would you say like, oh well, I don't have any major allergies, so like being vegan's easier? And it's like, well, look, if you've got allergies, right, like everything in life's harder, right? I get it, but like that doesn't mean you're okay to slit someone's throat.
No.
Oh, it's really inconvenient. I just really wanted the eggy bread because I can't have gluten. Oh, that's sad. Oh, you buy the eggy bread, so what if it's murdered a baby chick, and tortured its mother for like 5 years, and then it had its throat slit, all for this like bread? Like, come on, man! Like that's ridiculous. If you're a utilitarian, you can't say this.
Sir, why did you murder that man? I have a peanut allergy.
Yeah, exactly. Utilitarians have to bite bullets like more than anyone, right? Like, if anything, like that's one of the things that, like, usually that's what you're supposed to. I respect the utilitarian who's willing to go, actually, what I expect is more than that I can even achieve. I would say that's a utilitarian. On like maybe a utilitarian might say, we create these moral standards in order to be more conducive of a greater overall moral goal, and this is why. That might be a utilitarian sort of get out of jail free card in one respect, but that's as far as it goes. Like Peter Singer's 10%, give 10% of your wealth. There's no like, yeah, you okay? You've got a chronic illness, you've got an allergy. Do as much as you can, reasonably. That's practicable. Now, if we're being honest, that probably means you can avoid almost every animal product in the world. Medications are like the only thing I can think of that are like unavoidable for people that have these kind of illnesses.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. But something like, oh, I just really wanted that bread. That's ridiculous. I don't care.
Based. I don't care. Based.
Right.
Yeah.
But as I talk to more people and begin to understand that not everybody's in such a comfortable position, it's quite edifying and leads me to when I speak about veganism, try to be a bit broader in terms of what might be counted in terms of the practicability requirement, if you see what I'm saying.
Interesting.
I just don't, to point that out, like, I know a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm not vegan because my parents, like, I eat, but one day I will be vegan. We don't need to just broaden out the definition, like, in this manner. I don't think we need to. Like, I don't know what utility it really serves.
But I think he's also as well appealing to things that every vegan in the world already like. So, for example, something like medicine or not being able to buy your own food. Like the most militant vegans in the world argue for this.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're like, you are vegan if you're stuck on a desert island and you've got to eat someone, for God's sake, Like we know that there are circumstances which go beyond our control, which is why possible and practicable is in the definition. And people do use this, but he's making out as if vegans do not consider this. What vegan does not consider this? And maybe we don't consider it to the extent he's talking about, because we're not willing to let bullshit anecdote determine what is right and wrong, like for someone to do. Like, no, I want to know why you think you need meat before I'm like, okay, you need to eat, you need to kill animals. If someone's like, oh yeah, I can bear in mind, this woman eats only meat.
Yeah.
It's not, you know what I mean? Like, It's not as if I'm sorry, right? No, you're probably neurotic. It's not, you are, it is more likely for me, from my personal experience of people, to believe that you are mentally ill than have an actual need to consume animal products alone. I have, like, shit, I'm sorry.
I mean, like, there's probably more evidence for that. Like, oh, right. We're ready to continue. We're getting through. We're making it through. Everyone smash like, okay?
Okay, that's cool. I'm always surprised when I talk to vegans at how, like, my immune system's nuts, right? I shouldn't be alive. Like, something out there doesn't want me alive. I'm allergic to everything in ways that's just shocking. So when I talk to people, or even when I see like other meat eaters or just people eating like bread and things,
yeah, but like,
and looking like normal.
I'm not gonna lie to you, right? I see these. I've seen advertisements for these people at health food stores where it's like, find out what you're intolerant to, and what they mean by an allergy isn't something that a doctor's went, look, like you cannot consume X, Y, and Z, or that, if you do consume it, you start having a severe allergic reaction or an allergic reaction, you need an EpiPen, that kind of thing. What they're like, oh, my tummy feels bad when I eat, like, these few products.
It's funny you say that,
and
she did that, didn't she? She went, oh, I can't have dairy because I'm allergic to it. Wait, I'm not allergic to it. I'm intolerant to it. And if I don't, because if I have it, and then she stopped talking. Like, that literally happened in this conversation. So I don't really know if I believe the extent to the things she's allergic to, because she'll say,
yeah,
she literally did. I'm allergic. Oh, I'm not.
Honestly, like, like Neuroses 101 is like a health food store individual who's like, I can't eat like anything except for like reverse osmosis water and like gluten-free crackers. That's like, that's I'm sorry, like, yeah, I mean, like, some people are that unfortunate, but I don't think it's as represented as people think it is. Like, And like it's not really common. And if to be entirely honest with you, what's more likely is that if you do have this kind of like issue when you eat plants, it's like you probably have something like a bacterial infection in your small intestine. And it's not an intolerance. You need antibiotics.
Yeah, that could well be the case. Yeah. Oh, God. Like...
People, like, how is that possible? Like, how can I be so different? Even my brother, like, he'll go out and have a piece of pizza. And I was like, if I had a piece of pizza, I think I would die. Like how is it that different between people sometimes?
But it's the thing. I mean, I can't imagine having an experience like that, having to be so careful, and it's like
he's drinking it up.
You know, like it reminds me of people who have like serious nut allergies, and the thought of, you know, sometimes
Yeah,
when
it
I'm
is
sort of sat on a plane or
I have a
something
nut
like
allergy too.
Really?
I don't have a nut allergy. Like if someone ate a nut beside me, I would die. But I can't eat nuts without. I had an EpiPen.
Oh yeah, that was the bit I was talking about. I thought I'd already heard that. So she just sits it like she just sits.
No, I mean, look, I the thing is, right? At least that's you know somewhat plausible. Then if I eat any plants, I simply I can only eat beef. Is just not. I'm sorry, right? But that's highly implausible. I mean, so highly. You would be one in a million. And I'm sorry to say, but Alex should be saying at this point, like, I would argue that your ethics is that your existence is unethical. But you know, I don't expect you to kill yourself. That's a utilitarian.
Yeah, definitely.
Long time. Like it's just stupid allergies.
Yeah, and I think about it, and I just realize like I don't even know what it would be like to have to think every time you get on a bus or a plane or something, like what if somebody opens a packet of nuts and my life is in danger? It's like it's crazy, right? And and it's incredibly important to sort of be a bit human about this kind of thing, because we get a bit lost in the abstract philosophy or in the ideology and the debate. But this is really just about, as ethics always has been historically, it's about sort of how human beings can live the best kind of life. I just like to remind people that if you're committed to a vague notion of minimizing suffering, then the position boils down to something like, whenever you have the opportunity.
But I'm sorry to say that, but that's like maybe like, you know, like virtue ethics and deontology. That's, you know, how can an individual live the best kind of life? I'd say that's what ethics is about, but that's not what utilitarianism's about. That's not what consequentialism's about. It's about the greatest good for the greatest number.
You need to talk to him. I hope he talks to you.
Right? The good life is more Greek. It's more virtue. Mm-hmm. It's not consequentialist. It's not about, like, what he's talking about is more conducive of human flourishing. And that's not what, like, utilitarianism, like, oh right, oh, you're actually going to suffer, but it's going to do more good. All right, then that's what you should be doing. So yeah. Yeah.
Let's say prevent or not inflict suffering to animals. Take it. That's it. I mean, if you don't have that opportunity, if that opportunity isn't available to you, then fine. But as long as it is, I'm just recommending that that's the course of action that people should take. And people are already on board with this in principle. But in practice, like, you walk into a shop, and if you don't have serious allergies, and I recognize that your audience is going to be disproportionately different in this respect, but there'll be some people listening who have no serious allergies, who have pretty good access to all kinds of foods in the supermarket and live in a city where it's actually, not going to be more or less expensive.
I'm sorry, but like you do not find, like, what is it, like 100,000 people who are allergic to everything but meat.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, right? There's probably not even that many of them in the world.
Yeah, I mean,
you go into Starbucks and you order a latte, and what are you paying for? Well, you're paying for a cow to be forcibly impregnated, separated from the calf. That calf might be bolt gunned in the head, turned into veal, or raised to go through a similar cycle of exploitation. The dairy cow will, go through this cycle before being sold to a slaughterhouse to be killed, because the dairy and the meat industry are pretty tied up in this way. Where, I mean, if it's an Islamic slaughterhouse, the last thing it will hear is Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, and the sound of its own blood gushing to the floor. Okay, walk into the same Starbucks and add one word.
I don't know why that was relevant.
I don't know. It made me feel really uncomfortable when.
That was very, like, don't get me wrong. I think halal slaughter is probably worse because they don't even stun.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know why, the religious sermon has anything to do with that.
Yeah, and
that's kind of weird. I know that he doesn't like religion, and I know that there's, I know that he's, obviously, like, a lot going on. I think he's even had threats from Muslims and stuff, but that was a bit weird.
Yeah, and it's to forget that these methods that we put in procedure, like a lot of the time, aren't even successful in the first place. I mean, we literally we see that time and time again. But yeah,
I'll have an almond latte. I'll have a soy latte. I'll have a hazelnut latte. One of the myriad options now available to us, and none of this happens on your dime. You're not paying for this anymore. And a lot of people say, like, what we're weighing up is like the life of a cow and its suffering. And, you know, I don't like to anthropomorphize when I talk about calves being separated from their mothers. I'm not trying to be cutesy. Like, the maternal bond that animals have is something very much pre-human and certainly sort of pre-rational. You can watch these sadistic videos. It's almost comic. There are these technologies invented, like a truck or a quad bike with a cage and an open door on the side of it, and they drive around and they sort of scoop up the calf and drive her away. And you can watch these mother cows like chasing after their children in confusion. And people say that we're like weighing this up, the suffering of the animal versus like the taste of milk or something, or the convenience of milk.
But then why did you pander so much just to say, like, this is true? Like, I agree with everything here. Like, this is this is awful. Yeah, we should be, this is horrific and wrong. Lead with that.
Yeah. That
like
it would have meant I wasn't mad, but we're left with this. How you feeling so far, by the way? We're 40 minutes in.
40 minutes in, and and what for so much of it as vegans are kind of shit. I'm not like those, and I understand you're different. And it was sprinkled in between is animals severely suffer.
Yeah,
when we consume these products.
We should have more empathy for people, though.
But it's only factory farming that does it, because other farming's fine.
Yeah, other farming's fine.
It's not, because what it really is like the life of an animal on one side of the scale, and then you have the taste, pleasure, and the convenience, whatever, minus what you can get from a vegan alternative. And it's the leftover slither that we weigh up against the life of the animal. So even if, oat milk doesn't taste quite as nice as cow's milk, which I don't know if it does, it's a preferential thing. But let's say it's like 80% as nice. So you say it really isn't as nice. It's like, okay, you're not weighing up a cow's life versus the taste of milk. You're weighing up a cow's life versus like 20% of the taste pleasure that you get from milk, because the other 80% could have been gotten from oat milk, if you see what I'm saying. So it's pretty, it's worse than people think, in other words.
Well, that I get where you're coming from there, but if my theory is correct and that people can't be healthy without animal products, and I'm actually putting dairy in a different category.
This is exactly, to be fair, I hate to say it, but that's actually true. If she's correct in saying that people cannot be vegan, if she's saying that there is, for whatever reason, the average person would be in crippling pain, chronic illness, then it changes the ethical scenario vastly, right? And she's saying a large proportion of the United States are like this, right?
Yeah.
If he doesn't push back on that, then he's done a bad job. Then he's done a bad job.
Sorry, dairy without getting really bad arthritis and like a multitude of issues. So I don't eat dairy or eggs. They both caused issues. But if you do weigh, let's say the taste of milk, that's what you have on one side, and then the difference between like oat milk and normal milk to the suffering of a cow. Those are on your two sides. What if the problem with reducing your animal intake is actually chronic health problems, and then what you have on one side is an increase in chronic health problems, and then that's suffering compared to the life of an animal. And chronic health problems, like that's a different story, right? But I mean, it's not that useful at the moment to have a conversation about that, because we need more data. I think part of the reason I've been fighting back against kind of what I've called vegan ideology is
because I think the data that exists so far leans us the other direction. So avoiding chronic illness, then you should be eating a plant-based diet. Like, the evidence points us in that direction. So why, it's like, even if I was to accept we need more data, well, in the meantime, there's a moral gamble, right? We can gamble the suffering and death of billions, or trillions, versus the possible health benefits of a non-vegan diet, bearing in mind that you would at least have the advantage of trying a vegan diet, and if you did have chronic health problems, visiting a physician, right? So, even if I was to accept everything that she said, you're obligated to go vegan first and then modify your diet accordingly to give yourself respect. But with like, you know, coordinating with a physician. But that would be only if you could show that, like, oh, you know, this is actually having some negative health outcomes. And it's not even just indicative of the food you've chose to eat, rather than like, you know, I've been eating McPlants, you know, like, you know, maybe the vegan diet that you've been eating is wrong. And this is just any diet. Any diet. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's how diets work, man.
Yeah.
Because my concern is we have these people who are implementing agendas in major cities, so doing like Meatless Monday and things without the proper
implementing
scientific
agendas,
background.
a Meatless
So we don't
Monday.
have proper studies on these things. Now, we have studies like,
implementing agendas a Meatless Monday, not, let's say, lobbying the government to subsidize animal products so that you can live on a throne of fucking corpses whilst making billions of dollars. That's not implementing an agenda. You know, like paying for false studies because the studies that exist show animal products to be negative to health. No, that's not implementing an agenda. Implementing an agenda is a Meatless Monday. That's an agenda.
Based spitting facts.
An increase in meat increases your risk of, I don't know, everything, right? Like there's any study out there that you can say it increases your risk of heart disease or etc. Most of those studies aren't done isolating meat. They're done combining everything else you eat with meat. So the bun, the pop, like everything. And it would make me feel a lot better.
That isolate even types of meat.
Yeah. we have like the studies for like health outcome, like with chickens and
tell me you haven't read
meat.
studies without telling me you haven't read studies. It's like these studies are wrong. These studies, who like you know what that is?
Lying,
that's the equivalent of a paranoid person saying these people, right? Who the fuck are these people? You know what I mean? It's deliberately vague and ambiguous. You know, it pertains to anything. Oh, I'm not talking about that study. I mean another study.
Yeah. Oh god.
Or if people who are implementing veganism in major cities and saying you have to reduce the amount of meat you eat, even what's been happening in the Netherlands recently with taking away kind of farmers' land, saying you need to produce less nitrogen, and that means you can't farm cows anymore. It would make me feel a lot better if I didn't feel like there weren't studies being done as well. It's like this issue with chronic disease in North America. It's like killing people and reducing the life expectancy of people. And if that has to do with diet, that has to do with animal...
Considering that the number one cause of death in the United States is heart disease, which is indicative from atherosclerosis, which has been conclusively shown to be connected with cholesterol, with intakes of dietary saturated fat. How the fuck have you managed to make Meatless Mondays the problem for the United States?
Amazing. And yeah, she's just attributing something that she cannot substantiate to this problem. Like,
it's insane. Like, I'm sorry. Like, if someone's going to talk out their arse this much,
yeah,
do you know what I mean? Like, it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous. It's unscientific.
Get mad. People love it.
products, and we're pushing a vegan agenda to minimize animal suffering and to minimize climate change without looking at that part, we are in for a world of pain in like 10 years.
Yes, I mean, potentially. I imagine you probably receive similar...
He somewhat pushes back here. This is the only time, okay?
Concerns about the carnivore diet, about its potential health implications, and that there are sort of maybe like there's sort of a bit of data on this sort of being healthy, but it's
100%.
But it's potentially sort of disastrous in the. I mean, I don't know actually about the sort of long term. Has there been much research into the long term effect of?
There hasn't been any, which is the issue. Like the carnivore diet is ridiculously new, and the anecdotal reports are insane. Like you have people who lost a bunch of weight, are off all of their medications, and have a disease that was incurable in remission, which doesn't happen, right? You can't do that. There are some people.
I'm sorry to say, like, didn't her mother go on the carnivore diet, then get cancer?
Yeah, like a year after. Yeah.
Just anecdotally.
Anecdotally, looks bad, doesn't it? Anecdotally,
it looks quite bad.
You could apply it literally to that.
You know, my mom had cancer, went on a vegan diet, and is in the 5% who survive after 5 years with stage 4 cancer.
Anecdotally, that's looking good.
Anecdotally, that looks pretty good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But you know what? That's not how science fucking works.
Science lessons with PP.
You hear anecdotes with people who go on the vegan diet too, and they're suddenly in remission. And
Yes.
I know, and I think that there's a reason for that. I think that if you reduce the amount of dairy you're eating or eliminate dairy and eliminate eggs, I think that those can cause a lot of health issues for people. And if you eliminate processed foods, that can make you a lot healthier right off the bat. And that can all happen with a vegan diet, right? And that's something everybody should be doing regardless of what diet they're on. This episode is sponsored by NordVPN.
Right, let's move the sponsor over. There we go.
The energy boost, they feel cleaner, they feel healthier, they're losing weight, this kind of thing. For myself, I feel, I want to say, sort of roughly the same. I don't think it sort of makes it a huge difference either way. But yeah, we have to be careful. I think, of course, to be a healthy vegan is going to be more difficult than being a healthy meat eater.
According to what?
At least in terms of sufficiently healthy. So if you sort of just eat vague animal products, if you just like eat some chicken, eggs, a few vegetables, this kind of thing, like you're not going to be in great nutritional shape, but you'll be okay. If you take a similar approach as a vegan and you just sort of like eat whatever, you just have like a vegan cheese sandwich and some pasta, you're going to be in a lot more trouble.
That's not the evidence for that.
Well, as far as I'm aware, it is
the only thing
possible.
I can say is like, yeah, I mean, if you're not doing stuff like supplementing B12, for example, like, yeah, maybe, like, but I mean, it's in like soy milk, and it's pretty much the easiest thing to come by. I mean, like, I guess in some respects, but not entirely, because I mean, you could also get you also have the negative impacts of meat and dairy, which are which are connected with 14 out of 15 of our leading causes of death.
Yeah,
and 15, and I'd like to point out the only one that's not is doctors. It's like medication interactions and the medications you're getting are to treat the illnesses which are more likely on a non-vegan diet, because it's as I said, a vegan diet was shown in the Adventist study to be related to the lowest risk of chronic illness. I will say that the Adventists, it's worth saying that it's not. It was a very healthy diet, right? Like, it was like these people eat, like, they don't eat processed foods, right? Like, you know what I mean? They're just like that. They're very healthy people. But none of the Adventists eat processed foods. But the vegans had specifically lower levels of chronic illness. So it's kind of like, I understand what he's saying. Like, there is things in veganism that, I get, consider. Have a well-planned diet, but every diet needs to be well-planned. If you have if you just eat on a whim, probably going to get sick.
Yeah. I just don't know why he asserts it with such confidence. I don't know what gave him that idea. Yeah.
Certainly for adults, and a lot of dietetic associations across the world are saying that it's you can get all the nutrients required for a healthy living at all stages of life. But you're right, like, we should be skeptical of these things, and we need to, especially when it comes to raising children on these diets, we want to be sure, right? We don't want to be sort of like, well, this dietetic association seems to think it's fine, so let's go ahead and do it. It's like, let's really do some research here. But
well, I mean, the NHS have said that it's I mean, the fact that the NHS have came out and said that actually a vegan diet's healthy, I think is pretty conducive. I mean, considering it was also the first organization to prove that smoking caused cancer and such. It's not like it says these things lightly. I'd rather go with what the NHS said than some random blog.
Be skeptical
like, well,
of these
Mikhaila Peterson said,
yeah,
like,
don't be skeptical of her though. That would be silly.
Like, that's the thing. Like, like, she was advocating a diet which is like would she put a child on the diet that she suggests? Because
probably,
if she would, then that is insane. Like,
yeah. I think she does seem pretty dogmatic, so maybe. I don't know.
The carnivore diet, which you say is like brand new. I mean,
yeah, it's brand new.
The vegan stuff is still in its infancy too. Like, this is all fairly new, so we do need to be careful.
But equally, wait, I'm sorry, yeah, but I mean, there is probably, like, don't get me wrong, like, okay, like, even if you were to say that, like, veganism's in its infancy, like, in terms of vegan studies and stuff, like, maybe, right? But you know what? It's not in its infancy. Heart disease studies, which are connected with dietary cholesterol, and, like, if you're going to feed your kids eggs in the morning, you are less justified in feeding your kids meat, dairy, and eggs. Then at least like, you might not know how healthy a vegan diet is, But you can at least think, well, wait a minute, what would be lacking in a vegan diet that I should give my kid in some form? So you might think vitamin D, vitamin B12, you know, you might make sure that they're getting enough protein, maybe even increase the protein to a point in which they're getting that over consuming protein because you want to be sure. Now, how do you do this with animal products? You'd have to go, right, okay, so you can't have more than 5 grams of saturated fat a day, right? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That is how low you're going to have to cut that. So, like, eating steak for every meal, eating beef for every meal will absolutely breach that. The heme iron alone, there is no healthy intake of heme iron, as far as I'm aware. Like, what is considered reasonably healthy. So I just want, why we're only applying this to veganism is what I'm really saying. Like, what about veganism makes it so different to omnivorous diets that people consume? Because people, like, for example, cot death is being shown to be related to the consumption of milk.
Oh, is it?
So yeah, like, there is evidence that's starting to suggest that cot death might be associated with milk consumption. Now, as a parent, let's say I don't know yet. Fair enough, I don't know yet. I am now gambling as a parent my child's health, right? Will they be that child that dies of cot death? Now, it might be soy milk that might do it. At the end of the day, no matter what you feed in your kid, unless there's science to back it up, there is a risk, right? And I'm sorry to say this, it's the same risk for an omnivorous diet as a vegan diet. Like, if the science isn't there, if the science is out, it's out for everyone.
Yeah, true.
A lot of the time, if you pay attention to what it is that went wrong with people on vegan diets, it's something that could, at least in principle, have been avoided. But as I say, like, the thing that I really like to stress is that I've said a few times now, is this conditional claim that if it is actually unhealthy, then I think it's permissible, right? But as I say, I would still be committed to minimizing our intake, and certainly from completely eliminating our intake when it comes to factory farms.
Why do you think it's unhealthy though? Like even if he's willing to say, like, I get what he's trying to do. He's trying to say, like, even if, but why doesn't he just say, like, okay, like, even if that was the case, fair enough, you'd have to minimize. But I also want to know why you think this could be the case. Like, what reason do I have to believe this is the case rather than isn't the case?
Yeah, I don't know why he.
Why am I affirming the positive belief? Like, I mean, you can't do that. That is seriously going against the burden of proof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know why. It's like he let her get away with so much.
Okay.
Because the factory farming problem is partly an overconsumption thing too, right? Like, if you think to yourself, well, this stuff's maybe wrong, and so everybody starts sort of minimizing their intake. Let's say you really do need meat to be healthy or something like this.
Well, if it's wrong, you don't minimize it. You stop it. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh God.
The reasons why factory farming exists is because of the amount of animal products that people are eating. It's just, like, not sustainable to have.
Apparently, according to this Diana Rogers character, apparently if everybody switched to regenerative farming and there was no factory farming, the output would be similar, which I find difficult to believe given how many animals are in factory farms. But I mean,
I'd have to be a moron to believe that.
Yeah.
Because why would these incredibly profit motivated companies be making factory farms if they could have slapped free range on all of their labels and produced the same amount of animals with the same amount of land?
Yep.
Like, you'd have to be a moron to think that that's. I'm sorry. Like,
so many
all of the corporations in the world, all of the animal agricultural corporations in the world, you see, just want factories. That's what that. It's not because that they're more profit based. It's not because they're clearly showing that they can produce more animals with the smallest amount of energy input and the smallest amount of cost. It's just because that's people like factories. That's why.
Mm-hmm.
It's like what's worse is that they could have done this and charged more for it.
Oh, wow. There you go.
The people who wrote that book, the same question, which was, okay, switching to regenerative farming is all good, but say people do need meat for health and say we need the same amount of meat we're producing. Can you do that with regenerative farming? And she thought we could. And part of the reason we could do that is because you can put animals like goats and things on mountainous areas where nothing else can grow anyway, and they can still survive, right? So you can still be eating plants on like rocky terrain where you wouldn't be.
Yeah, the mountain goats. Imagine them, all the mountains in Newcastle, all the mountains in
And
Norwich.
that sounds like, that doesn't sound like a logistical problem at all.
No,
you
not at
know?
all.
No. We're just gonna let the goats live on the mountains, and then when it comes time to get them goats, we'll just teleport them down.
We'll teleport them down, or we'll go on a 3-hour hike and chase them.
Yeah, we'll just yeah.
Yeah,
It's fine. It's fine. We'll just say
all that just to be a carnist. Bit embarrassing, really. It's gonna be good.
Be able to have other things. So apparently,
Yeah.
considering that,
would
like,
still
I
be the
know
same.
Cosmic Skeptic knows we could reduce we could reduce farming by horticultural land use by 70%. We could reduce farm and land use by 70%. And I've heard him quote that.
I don't think he mentions
It's an
that.
Oxford student.
Yeah, don't think he mentions that.
Same.
But we're talking about somewhere between 80 and 100 billion land animals alone every single year. I would say that it's certainly possible that, especially if people start eating more healthily and become more aware of their diets and minimizing their meat intake or something like this, that a global regenerative system of agriculture would be enough to sustain healthy living for everybody. But to say that we get the same output,
I don't know.
I'm not sure. I'll have to.
Yeah, maybe we need to. I want to ask you about. Oh my gosh, it's
I'm
been
not
an
sure.
hour already.
Why is he
Okay.
being so passive?
Well, this is why
Man.
people were saying, like, people are getting angry about it, but people, and I do kind of think it's like he is simping. I don't know if he just kind of, as soon as someone gives a different belief and he likes them, does he just shut down? I don't know.
I just don't understand, because I think, like, let's be honest, like, that should have been met with like, I'm not saying ridicule, because that would be impolite, but with severe skepticism. Like, that should have been that to me sounds highly implausible. Even that the likelihood of that being the case seems to be unbelievably implausible, because of the profit motives of the corporations involved, because of the land use that is needed, because of the amount of energy that you need, because of like, for God's sake, something like, even talking about the logistics of, oh, wait a minute, maybe we don't have the necessary infrastructure to utilize all the mountainous regions in the world as goat farms. Maybe it's not feasible. Maybe the goat farming community don't have access to these mountains because they're owned, and maybe the population that own them don't want goats everywhere.
Maybe
like
not.
anything, not just like, well, maybe we could just farm goats to the point in which we consume 100 billion a year. I suppose it's possible that there could be 100 billion goats.
Oh god. Yeah, and it's weird because I'm trying to remember what comes after the fact, but it seems like they circle again. But we're getting there. We're nearly there. I haven't got loads of time left, which is really annoying. That's why
I'd have to have another podcast, because I wanted to ask you about your atheism beliefs and get into
I
that.
want to say this though, like, there is, like, as well, like, just to clarify as well, just in case, like, I'm not saying that he's simping. I think that's
no, I'm saying that.
Yeah, I mean, it would be. I mean, that's the worst thing to do anyway. If you actually, like, simping is like the worst, like, thing ever. It's just not gonna do anything. But, like, I think that, like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that he's being overly gracious to what seems to be ludicrous points to justify an horribly unethical conclusion from his own standard.
Yeah.
That could be. Let's just leave that for the next one, because that could be an entire thing on its own.
If you like.
Perhaps at some point we should have. Maybe I'll watch the video again, the Sacred Cow video, because I was surprised about like what she claimed in it, but it was pretty interesting, and maybe we could have a conversation about that again to see if there's common ground there. I think that there's a lot of overlap between how you're thinking and how I'm thinking, and I think it all kind of chalks up to, if you could do a vegan diet and be equally as healthy, even if it's more difficult to achieve that, but if you're careful and you can be equally as healthy, then I don't see anything wrong with it. The only reason that I see something wrong with it is because I believe that you're missing key nutrients, and I think the only way to rectify that position are to have more studies and properly done.
No, that was an empirical claim. What nutrients, man?
Yeah.
You're missing key nutrients. Which ones?
Which ones?
Studies. So you talked about evidence for the carnivore diet. The only thing that we have at the moment for the carnivore diet is a study that was done basically on self-reported symptoms from people. And so that's going to skew towards people who are already feeling better. And like anybody in the scientific community would just laugh at that study. However, it's enough. That's like 3,000 anecdotes of people saying I was really chronically ill and now I'm not at all. And that's
Yeah, wasn't it also showing like really raised cholesterol? I'm pretty sure. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm healed. Like they pretty sure.
I don't care about group anecdotes anyway,
Yeah.
man. Like I'm sorry, right? But how many members of ISIS were there? I'm sure they all have anecdotal claims about how great ISIS was. I don't care. It's like group delirium, the mob mentality. I don't care.
Yeah. And
Like it's not science. It's just because a lot of people say it doesn't mean it's true.
no,
I don't care.
I don't care. It's more to owe to the fact that I don't even know if she's read it. So...
should be enough for somebody in the scientific community to say, hey, why don't we do a controlled study? Like we need to do a controlled study. It's not that difficult. You take some people who have autoimmune disorders, you monitor their diet for 6 months and then see what happens. It just needs to happen, right? And then at least we could have a conversation about, oh, wow, there was overwhelming success. This needs to be taken seriously.
We did have some of the studies like where we put people on with like things like multiple sclerosis and stuff on vegan diets, and it seemed to reduce symptoms, and there was like clinical trials on that. I was like there was like quite a few studies on autoimmune disorders with veganism, and it seemed to have a positive impact. Even like so.
But she hasn't read any of these. She doesn't know about these.
Like I'm sorry to say this, right? But like look at it like this, right? Like look at nutritionfacts.org, right? It like dedicates itself to going through scientific studies that have been done and looking towards health-based, like science-based health conclusions. And what are they promoting? Veganism, right? That's it. They're a charitable organization sifting through studies precisely for the fact of trying to find the healthiest diet, and they promote a plant-based diet. So what the studies show right now is a plant-based lifestyle is the best. I'm gonna go with that. I'm just like, why wouldn't I go with that? I think it'd be dogmatism to not go with that.
What's weirder is that she said she doesn't even believe in science anyway. She literally has said, I don't believe in science.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, I don't believe in science.
I don't even know why she wants it anyway. I guess to convince other people. Yeah. So.
This is a one-off, but like I don't know what to do without more data.
Yes, it's pretty difficult to know, but I don't think we need really any data to know that factory farming needs to come to an end. Now,
well, we have data for that too.
Yeah,
we do. Like even just the what it does to the environment, factory farming.
Yes, of course, but you need only
and antibiotic resistance. That enough, like you said, that alone could be so bad for everybody on the planet that we need to avoid that at all costs, right?
Yeah, this is why the COVID pandemic can sort of serve as a wake up call, as people often like to
not
frame
if it was leaked from a lab, Alex. Not if it was leaked from a lab.
People have actually misunderstood the point that I make when it comes to COVID, particularly because of course COVID is at least it's thought a zoonotic disease. Kind of doesn't really matter. I mean,
but it would still be a zoonotic disease actually, even if it did come from a lab. It would just be a modified one. It is still originated in bats. It's a development from SARS, and SARS was originally captured because it became a pandemic in China prior to COVID and the onset of COVID. So like, point is that like the Chinese wouldn't have been able to weaponize it if we hadn't got it from bats in the first place.
If what she's saying is the case,
but I'm saying like even if it was the case,
it's still like zoonotic.
Its origin was due to our relationship with animals.
Exactly.
And then it came from factory farming. Like that's definitely not the case. But we can say that but the next one will, right? We can say if we look at something like COVID and look at how quickly we can just completely debilitate our entire population, and then we think, okay, how can we stop this kind of thing happening again, regardless of where these diseases have come from in the past? If we're taking disease-ridden animals and we're forcing them into close proximity in tiny cages and then shipping them around the world to share diseases with each other, the chances of a zoonotic disease developing is being exponentially increased.
Why?
And so even
if the way that he should, what I like to say as well, when you look at COVID, during COVID, there was small outbreaks of bird flu, swine flu in Germany. It was like bird flu in Ireland, I believe. Swine flu in Germany. These outbreaks happen all the time. They just don't necessarily have the genes which would be necessary for a pandemic level of event locked in yet. They just simply haven't turned into a monstrous murderous killer that is going to infect 20% of, even if it infects 20% of the population with a death rate of 50%, right? They don't have to be super virulent. They don't have to be like the worst thing ever. They could just murder you really fast, like smallpox, had a very a pretty high death rate. But it and it doesn't mean that it's going to be as virulent, But that, I mean, that's not even like there are things that are like, I mean, I think H5N1, I think had a death rate. It was like 20-30%.
Ebola's like 50% mortality rate, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Ebola's about 50%. Again, like as you say, like that's zoonotic origin as well.
Yeah.
If the last pandemic didn't come from factory farming, it's very likely that the next one will. But of course, all of this, by the way, about the animal suffering and the gas chambers and the disbudding, and I haven't talked about the experience of pigs and factory farms, which I think are the worst. Well, it's not the worst, but pigs, for some reason, for me, have always been the most easy to empathize with, maybe due to their intelligent similarity to dogs, whatever. But like, for example, piglets who are born on factory farms, if they're too sick to be profitable, and this is often after having their teeth yanked out and their tails cut off without anesthetic, which, by the way, why would they do that? Why would they yank teeth out and cut the tails off piglets when they're born? Well, it's because as the pigs are kept in close proximity later in life, they start to basically go insane and start cannibalizing each other out of frustration and hunger.
You should have led with this, man.
But have empathy for the human, though, PP.
If you just led with this, I don't think I'd be so annoyed. I'd be like, all right, like at least he said like the entire, like he pointed out the immense, the immensely unethical nature of this industry.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead, it was talked around, and instead we're empathizing with Mikhaila's health issues.
I know, that's been what most of it's been.
Often do that by biting each other's tails at first, and so they take out the teeth and get rid of the tails. But okay, if these piglets are too sick to be profitable, then what happens to them? Well, they'll be killed. Most people can probably work that out. But how are they killed? Well, one of the most common methods is a method that's colloquially known as thumping. It's blunt force trauma. It's where the pigs are literally just taken by their hind legs, these piglets, and have their skulls repeatedly smashed into the concrete until they die.
Yeah.
Of course, you can watch footage of this, and it seems when you see this kind of stuff that it's like rogue farmers picking up animals and smashing their skulls into the pavement.
No.
But this method of caving in a piglet's skull against the pavement is officially approved by both Red Tractor and the RSPCA, which are kind of the animal welfare governing bodies in the UK when it comes to farm. By the way, the same RSPCA that recently confiscated the footballer Kurt Zuma's pet cat because footage emerged of him kicking it across the kitchen for a laugh and filming it and putting it on Snapchat. They went and confiscated that cat, but they officially approve as a method of slaughter for piglets who could be kept alive but are just too sick to be profitable to take them by the hind legs and cave in their skulls against the pavement. This is obviously insanity, but what I wanted to say was that all of this stuff that I'm talking about is if the farmers are abiding by the law, right? These are all legally approved practices, except I think the tail docking and the teeth, I think is illegal in the UK at least, but farmers still do it. But that's my point, is that like, sans that, everything else I've talked about, everything is legal. This is industry standard practice. And yet every single time we send hidden cameras into factory farms, we find that farmers are routinely breaking even the most sort of basic and ridiculous legal guidelines that are in place already. So all of this horror and moral embarrassment is already occurring, even if they're following the law. And then factor in the case or the consideration that in a great many cases they're not, and the problem gets only worse. There was a farm in, I think it was Aberdeenshire. I'll check that and make sure that that's correct, because I can't remember which farm it was. That recently, it was a Red Tractor approved farm, which was discovered by sort of undercover investigators to be thumping piglets to death by caving in their skulls against the bars of the cages that their own mothers were being kept in. This kind of stuff is crazy. And so when people say to me kind of like, yeah, I try to make sure my meat comes from a good source, it's like, do you? Are we actually on board about this? Because when I ask people, what do you think about this kind of treatment of animals? They say, oh, that's horrible, that's terrible. It's like, well, let's make some noise about it then, right? Let's stop buying factory farmed animal products. Let's engage in protests.
Wouldn't the right way to encourage people to stop eating factory farm to give them alternatives rather than saying just stop? Like, wouldn't that be a better, even just sales, like sales
would be like a soy burger, man.
Yeah. Otherwise, the alternative is like a farm you recommend that's getting
it's all right.
suspended for cruel.
It's okay, because what you don't understand is they're allowed outside And because we're allowed outside, that when that time comes, I can kick them to death. Or I can
Yeah,
beat them to death with a
because they
pipe.
had a good
Because
life.
it's small scale.
Small scale. Again, you can, be abusive towards someone. Just a little bit. Just don't overindulge. That's the problem.
That's it. Like it's not that one murdering like babies. That's not what's wrong.
Ugh,
It's that one murdering too many babies.
too many. Yeah, exactly. Gotcha.
Try to stop factory farming.
Ethics
If I was going to
101.
market that idea, what I would do is, hey, look at what's happening here. This is bad, but look at this farm and what they do. It's only a little bit more. You can order it from this place. It's only a little bit more, and you get to reduce this amount of suffering. And hey, it's carbon negative.
Reduce this amount of
Isn't that a better
suffering.
sell?
If you're eating a burger, right, that
It's
came
carbon-
from the like a body part of like a
It's
non-factory
carbon.
farmed
It's
animal.
carbon. It's carbon negative. Did she just try and imply that you could produce cows?
Yes.
Yeah, you can produce cows carbon negative, whilst they produce a more potent carbon emission, more potent carbon equivalent emission, methane.
Yeah.
Like I recently found out apparently methane has a half-life of 10 years, so it's actually it has. Well, I got told 10.
Okay.
So like it might be better in the sense that it doesn't it takes 100 years for carbon apparently. But the thing is in 10 years we might have already passed runaway warming into
Yeah.
runaway warming. So
And the problem is with methane, like, because it's just continually being pumped in, like, there's never actually this period where we've not got methane in our atmosphere. So it's really bad. Really worrying. Right.
Then like just stop.
It's definitely a better sell. In that I actually think this is maybe what we're going to begin to see happening as veganism grows in popularity.
It's a better sell.
Yeah.
How is that a better sell? Like you know what that is. Actually, it's a worse sell. Do you know why it's a worse sell? You know what and there is a genuine argument for this, and it's the number one thing that affects product consumption in the UK. What is it? Price.
Price. Yeah, because people will buy the plant-based options if they're cheap. If they're reduced,
Well,
people will buy the...
People will buy alternative. It's economics 101, the elasticity of supply and demand, right? As the price goes up, the demand drops.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's just the way it is, right? You know, and what's worse, I think, in this scenario, is that you can't encourage an alternative which is both cheaper and better, and tastes as good. Right? Like it's just what the only thing that's being maintained is dogmatism. It's that they don't have to call themselves vegan.
Yeah.
The response, there's likely going to be cropping up, at least when it becomes significantly economically viable, because there are enough people who are willing to sort of go vegan. You'll have companies cropping up saying like, hey, all of the problems that the vegans are raising about this horrible treatment that they tell you about in the footage they show you, here's our farm, we don't do any of that, we keep the calves with the mothers and when they produce their milk, all this kind of stuff, and this is fine.
I believe them
definitely,
100%.
as you say, that's definitely going to sell better than only eat plants. So it's definitely going to be more likely to convince people to stop eating meat. And also it is genuinely, obviously, infinitely preferable to factory farming. Of course, when you start really engaging in animal ethics...
Infinitely preferable to factory farming. I think I mentioned this to you before, where I was just like, because I think you said something like, he said that's infinitely preferable. When I say a utilitarian can't say that. I know that it might be a saying, that he's saying it non-literally maybe.
Yeah, like hyperbole sort of thing.
Yeah, like it can't be actually infinitely preferable, because utilitarian, everything is an order of magnitude better, because it is a calculation. It's about how much utility. If it was infinitely better, then it would be absolutely the right thing in all cases for utilitarianism. So that has to be that's actually necessarily wrong.
Oops.
But like it might have meant it non-literally. He's like he's just exaggerating. He's like, oh, it would be a lot better, not infinitely better, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sort of vegan activism and animal ethics I see as two totally different spheres. Vegan activism is about, as you say, what's going to get people to stop eating meat, what's going to sort of bring down factory farming, this kind of thing. Whereas animal ethics is like this interesting academic study into the nature of pain and what morally matters. Once you sort of engage in that for long enough, you realize that there are arguments to say that even if we're not factory farming animals, there might be good reason not to be killing them unnecessarily. And so you might be committed ethically to the view that, farms that aren't factory farms, that produce so-called sort of ethically produced meat, are still unethical. They're still, as long as you've got sort of plant-based alternatives available to you. But as I said earlier, that would become almost like more pedantic. It would be kind of like, because sort of taking the life of an animal without its consent is wrong, we should probably be eating plants instead. But it wouldn't be this like huge, obvious moral emergency that factory farming is. So yes, I agree with you that it sells better, but it's
Look,
it wouldn't be. Imagine. Like, I mean, I guess like in terms of scale, but like, imagine if he should be applying this to like anything else. Like, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it's true that like domestic violence, domestic violence is just not a moral emergency because like
if it happens
people
once a
don't beat their
month.
wives as much. Yeah, if you just do it once a month, it's not a moral emergency anymore.
Yeah, it's just a nice,
I get.
thought.
It's just like, come on, man. Like, you don't need to say that. Like, even if it is the case, it's still wrong. You don't have to say, okay, it's not as bad. Like, for example, someone being killed down the street. Awful. Someone just gets murdered down the street brutally. You know why? Because they're a Jew. Awful. Is it as bad as the Holocaust? Probably not. From
Not
whether you're
moral
looking at it from
emergency.
yeah, it's not a moral emergency. It's not the same thing. There's one anti-Semite. He's been punished. He's been, rather than, let's say, the mass mass incarceration and murder of millions of individuals. Yeah, that's worse. But like, they're both wrong. Just you don't need to tell us that millions being killed versus one person being killed is worse. Like, I can put that. Most people can put those pieces together. Like, the Ukraine war is worse than like a street fight. I can work that out.
Not moral emergency.
Difficult for somebody who's ethically committed to the view that essentially exploiting animals is always wrong to advocate for that, right? People have often compared it to other ethical issues, talking about how they want no cages rather than bigger cages, this kind of thing. It's like, if you advocate for incremental steps, you seem to sort of be legitimizing the process. I mean, you can imagine somebody talking about like abortion, imagine like a pro-life activist, and there was some way to sort of make, abortions slightly less painful for the fetuses or something, presuming that the fetus is at a level where it can feel pain. And we say we've developed this technology where as they're being killed, they feel like 50%
What are you talking
less
about?
pain
That technology
like that.
exists. It's called anesthesia.
Pro-life will probably say no.
Like,
This is still
I'm sorry, like, pro-life people do actually talk about this, whether even pro-choice people talk about this, whether fetuses need anesthesia, because there's evidence to say that they can suffer whilst being aborted, and so there's a debate whether they should be anesthetized.
Well,
so like, yeah, that is a technology. But would pro-life people be like, I just want you to inject. I understand that you're killing babies and millions of babies. Like, imagine. I mean, like, from a pro-life standpoint, this is a moral it is a moral travesty. It's a catastrophe.
It's this infanticide, on there.
Yeah, it's mass infanticide. Infanticide, rather.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's all right. Like, it's clearly wrong. They're not gonna go like, oh yeah, but just at least, like, give them some pain relief. You'd be like, you fucking monster, stop killing children, would probably be closer to what you'll be met with.
Yeah, they wouldn't be like, they'd be like, no, yeah. It's so, with veganism, people are so quick to do half measures, because I just don't think, like, I don't mean to like delegitimize, Cosmic's vegan journey, but he is in the infancy of it. And I don't know if that's affected it. I don't know if he's fully made the connection. I certainly know that, like, the longer I've been vegan, the more I've been able to, like, rationalize and reason and, like, understand the victims, because you don't just suddenly go vegan and then, like, oh, now I understand the victim's plight. No.
Then again, like, some new vegans are like more militant in the sense that it's fresh in their minds. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, so I don't know, man. Like, this is it seems like I'm not okay with them. Like, you don't advocate for half measures anyway. Like, there has to be a moral baseline, right? And I mentioned this student with Henry Sedgwick in terms about moral principality and the need for moral principality in order to produce a society which is more conducive of utility anyway. If you start advocating for, oh well, like kill them in this way, then you're opening the door for them to be killed. When you open the door for them to be killed at all, you increase the likelihood of them being killed brutally.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to ban their being killed, that risk does not exist anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yep, precisely. Right. We've got 12 more minutes.
Immoral. And I said to them, well, but don't you recognize that this would be a better sell? If you told somebody who was, who wanted to have an abortion, like, hey, if you use this procedure, the child's going to feel less pain, they're going to say yes. And they're going to be far more likely to say yes to that than they are to just bringing the baby to full term. I think the pro-lifer would still have a hard time sort of advocating for this technology, for the technology that sort of 50% reduces the pain involved in abortion or something like that. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like
For sure.
It would be impossible to do that. So for someone in my position who sort of does deeply care about animal suffering, more broadly than just factory farming, it's still troublesome to me, the idea of animals being bred and confined and killed.
Seems it.
Okay,
but
good.
It's way better than factory
there
farming.
we
so
are. Yeah,
I'd celebrate
absolutely.
and move from factory farming to more traditional forms of agriculture. But I still think that I would be in the camp of arguing that plant-based agriculture is the way to go, or at least cultivated meat.
It only took an hour. How long is this? Like an hour in, and we finally got to the point. No, actually, this regenerative farming thing that you're talking about, it's actually necessarily unethical. There we are. Like, you know what I mean? That's this conversation would have went so much better if he had just said that.
Just mentioned.
If he could have just.
Yeah.
The next big sort of exciting development in the conversation, which is if we can produce sort of essentially biologically the same matter without causing any animal suffering, then the problem essentially just disappears.
Yeah, well, if that's a possibility and it is just meat, but it's from a lab, then hooray. But I feel like that's
the most economically viable.
Yeah, but it doesn't exist. Not really.
No. Yeah, I mean,
neither do spare planets to
farm our
cows.
You can probably buy like a
I think
to
be entirely honest with you, though, it does exist. It's just not at a price point which people consider which is viable. So that's literally an innovation curve right there.
Mm-hmm. That's
like the price will like they've already got the point when they can produce casein through microorganisms and stuff. It's sad that you've kind of got to get to this point when it's like, oh no, don't worry, you don't have to change yourself at all. You can just you can just buy whatever you were going to buy, and we've scienced our way out of this ethical problem. But it's genuinely possible. It's like you're saying it doesn't exist, but we're almost there. Really, we're not actually that far off. I'd say probably within the next decade. Yeah, easy, like 5 years even. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go for like $500,000 or something at the moment because the technology is there. But this is how all technologies start. And so to answer your question, because it's a bit of a long-winded answer, and I don't want to be seen like I'm avoiding the question. You said, well, isn't sure, advocating for veganism is great and all to stop factory farming, but it wouldn't actually just be more effective to advocate for regenerative agriculture or something?
It wouldn't just be more effective. It would also mitigate the risk that long-term veganism isn't healthy for people. And it's not just that. I think that I do believe this. I think if you'd gone back, say to the 1940s, this is just a theory here, but I feel like if you've gone back to the 1940s and you put somebody on a vegan diet, it's possible that they could do it properly to be healthy longer term. Like, I'm willing to go that far. I think the amount of chronic illness we have now and how sick the average person is, like the percentage of people with autoimmunity, it's skyrocketed. That, mental disorders, obesity, right? It's bad right now. I think the average person right now is sick, and that's why we're seeing such restrictive diets work for people. Like, I don't think the carnivore diet, there were some anecdotes of people in like the 1910s on a carnivore diet. They went to visit Inuits and then they already ate like that. So set aside, I don't think you'd see so many people on a carnivore diet 60 or 70 years ago when people didn't have these chronic diseases. I don't think my diseases would existed exactly back then. But I think if you're dealing with people now, pushing for
what's causing more diseases then? Like, what's the cause? Like, if what's the mechanistic cause? Like, if you're saying like, I don't think these diseases existed in the 1940s and it's a modern era problem, like, what about the modern era has caused these diseases, and why is meat the treatment?
Not only
or like
that,
or why is an elimination diet helpful?
Not only that, but things have to be discovered before we understand that they're present. And a lot of these like illnesses, diseases, we didn't have the means to be able to actually know of. And so like
autism, for example, is a big. I guess,
it's like more people autistic these days. It's like because people didn't have knowledge of autism, so we don't actually really know. How many people were autistic?
It's the same thing with mental health issues. You just get told you had bad nerves.
Yeah, or somebody walking around with like
be a man.
like,
why don't you just fucking
like
the mental health problems
psychosis.
don't exist because we just tell them be a fucking man.
Yeah, or if they had
You
like
know?
psychosis or schizophrenia, someone would have deemed them a witch. Like we had.
Oh, you would have far enough back.
Yeah, just.
Regenerative farming also mitigates the issue that we could potentially be pushing a diet that's going to increase chronic disease, which I think it might. And at least I think we need more studies to prove that it doesn't.
Yeah, I understand that concern, and I think a lot of vegans would be quick to dismiss it with reference to, as I say, like dietetic associations saying that veganism is healthy. It's like we need to take this stuff very seriously. You know, scientific communities being like, yeah, we've done some studies and it seems pretty safe to be doing this to our children. It's like we need to be really sure about this stuff. So although I guess I'm pretty optimistic about the idea of a plant-based diet. We could risk the lives
of billions of animals, and we can also risk the well-being of ourselves, which is, you know, in terms of eating meat, dairy, and eggs. But we need to be careful about veganism. I mean, for fuck's, at least you know, like at least say like the risk is on both sides.
Yeah.
And right now we are living at a point of tragedy. I could live with that. I could live with them saying that. I cannot live with this.
No, I cannot live with any.
Nutritionally adequate. I wouldn't want to dismiss those concerns, and we would like to sort of amplify that I care about them too. But there's kind of a way of avoiding both problems, which would be cultivated lab-grown meat. This is like, if there was one thing that we could sort of all focus on as what's actually, in reality, probably going to have the biggest effect, it might be lab-grown meat, because you still get the animal products that you want to eat. You still avoid the sort of health concerns that you're talking about, but also you now don't actually have to kill any animals at all. And so even if we're sort of not sure what we think ethically about taking the lives of animals, if they've had a net positive existence, which I'm actually quite sympathetic to the view that if they genuinely have a net positive existence, and that existence is parasitic on the idea that they will be killed eventually, that might actually be good for the animal, probably is good for the animal.
Regenerative farming, maybe,
which
depending on the farm.
Interestingly, isn't quite the same thing as saying that you have the right to kill them. I mean, it might be the case that it is actually better for the animal.
Why is she allowed to say regenerative farming without evidence, and we're not allowed to say veganism? I don't understand. How many times can she throw in regenerative farming into this conversation and him not go like, oh, where's the evidence?
Mm-hmm.
To bring them into existence and then kill them. But as Jeff McMahon, who was at the event in Oxford, pointed out in a pretty wonderful essay on the eating of animal products, even if it were the case that this animal wouldn't exist if we didn't plan to kill it, and it was better for the animal to exist and then be killed, once it exists, it's still arguable that you don't have the right to take its life, because now that it exists, there's like it's like an interest that you're upsetting by killing it. It's a bit of a sort of sidetrack. But what I was going to say is that lab-grown meat might solve all this problem. And so I think that if we could sort of invest a lot more time and energy into lab-grown meat, we'd be on the right track. But as you say, it's quite a long way off. So we're sort of figuring out what to do in the meantime. But that's kind of how I see it, given the advent of this technology and how revolutionary it could be. For me, it's kind of a case of, well, what do we do in the meantime? You know, for the next, I don't know, few decades, or however long it's going to take. Might take longer than that. Who knows? You know, how do we manage ourselves until then?
I don't think so. They managed to bring the price down from $1 million, or was it $100,000 like for a burger to like 1,000?
Yeah.
It was like a massive drop.
Mm-hmm. And it will only drop further.
Yeah.
But I've said before in some podcast or interview or something that, although I do think that, because you were asking about what's actually going to be most...
Is anything said from this point on that's really important? Because I am desperate for the toilet. So I think we could probably... I'm just going to quickly pop to the toilet. I'll be 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah, I'll read some of the tips while you're gone. Let's see, we had Bethany. Let's do this, okay?
Marvel salad.
Bethany the lad tipped £1. I passed out vegan cheesecake today at my job. Everyone said they were scared to try it, only to lick the crumbs off their plate. One coworker said they didn't like vegan food last week. They ate their words today. I had a massive shit-eating grin.
Massive shit-eating grin. Thank you, Bethany. I appreciate that. It's funny when people are like, oh, I don't like vegan food, and then they chow it down like the thirsty, hungry bugger they are. Thank you. Oh, God, what's this? What's this one?
Marvel salad.
Annoying interruption. The lad tipped £1.
Really did that.
Backslash slash 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 backslash.
Well, that's enough of that. God, annoying interruption strikes again. Oh,
Marvel
sorry,
salad.
pee poo poo man.
The pee pee poo poo man. The lad tipped £1. How much must we tip for some interruptions to happen?
It wasn't going to happen. I didn't want to interrupt PP. I'm sorry. It's just because I had limited time today, and I knew that if I did, people would tip and, you know what I mean, be naughty about it. Got a few that I'll address to PP, so I'll wait for them.
Marvel salad.
Vegetanuki. The lad tipped £5. Meat is important for H health. An idiot.
The idiot here being
Marvel
Alex.
salad.
Vegetanuki. The lad tipped £5. Silent nods. Alex O'Connor to an idiot.
Thank you so much for that, Vegetanuki. Damn.
Marvel salad.
Interruption did tip.
Lucio. The lad tipped £1. French tip.
back.
Also hello big
You're
PP.
back. Thank you. Did you hear that? Lucio
No.
said hello, big PP. Can you hear these tip sounds?
Who said that?
Lucio, French lad.
Oh, hello. Hello, Lucio.
There's a few tips that were addressed to you, and just tell me if you can
Yeah.
hear this or not.
Marvel salad.
Vegetanuki. The
Any?
lad tipped £5.
Yeah.
Why are the deontologists/virtue ethicists here so dismissive of the idea that one can be vegan for utilitarian reasons?
One, I mean, I would first and foremost, I would say that utilitarianism is wrong in general. So it's not to say that I'm saying that you're not vegan for utilitarianism, that you're not vegan if you're utilitarian. I don't believe I've ever said that. Like for example, I think there are utilitarian vegans. I think that there are people who avoid exploiting animals. That avoid causing unnecessary suffering in animals and so on. But I think that the main thing is that Alex is defining veganism as a utilitarian concept, or through utilitarianism. Veganism isn't defined through utilitarianism. It's not. That's why exploitation is in the definition. So it's not to say that you can't be a utilitarian and a vegan. You can avoid exploiting and causing harm to animals. You can avoid animal products. You can, perform vegan actions. You can live the exact same lifestyle. And you could do it because you believe that it's, to avoid suffering. To say that it is that to define veganism through that would be the issue. But that's the problem. Like, if me and Alex are necessarily going to have to come to lockerheads, or me and any utilitarian, or basically any deontologist or virtue ethicist and a utilitarian are going to come into lockerheads in general over ethical stances. Like, for example, if you're an egoist and you like, if you were to define veganism through egoism, right, and you said that it's only for your own benefit, okay, does that mean you could say, like, I am a vegan because I believe that eating plant-based is for my benefit, and so I avoid consuming animals, but only as so far as that it's for my benefit. If it was not for my benefit, or if it was in my interest to kill animals, I would kill them. Would you allow an egoist to redefine veganism along those lines? And if not, why is the utilitarian given the leeway?
Well, thank you, Vegetanique, for that. I hope you're satisfied with the answer. We got another one from
Marvel
Spooderman.
salad.
Spooderman. The lad tipped £1. If you had superpowers, would you be a superhero or supervillain?
Superhero every time. I'm sorry, I was always an Autobot over the Megatron. Autobot over the Decepticons, rather. Always rooting for the good guy. So I would be a superhero, even though they are also kind of evil as well sometimes. What about you, PP?
I've got like Batman tattooed on my arm. But like at the same time, I don't know, man. Like, I really hate the idea. I like Batman because he's just a normal guy. I kind of hate the idea of
guy.
having. Yeah, he's a normal rich guy, but he's a human, right? Like, it's like Lex Luthor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I also really love Lex Luthor. I think I just love like the whole like pushing humanity to its limits and all that. Just fighting a god and winning, but as a mere man. Like, I love that. But I think the main thing I think I have with superheroes in general is kind of raised by The Boys, where it's like if you watch The
Oh,
Boys,
I
you're like,
love the
I,
boys.
I'm more with Billy Butcher, you know. Where it's like,
Mhm.
wow, these are super cunts.
Yep. Yeah, the soup cans. Soup cans. Okay, we got a final one addressed to you.
Marvel salad.
Thank you, Spoiled Man, by
Michael Askey the lad tipped £15.
the way. What a lad.
PP will get a tip too. Excellent stamina from you both. Big love.
Wow, you'll be getting a tip too. Thank you so
Oh,
much, Michael. Appreciate that.
thank you very much, man.
We'd go longer if I didn't have to be quiet now. But I guess so what we should do is kind of a roundup of your thoughts on how it all went.
I think, yeah, I think that sounds like good, and we could just sort of like talk, like just have a quick chat about the sort of conclusions.
Yeah.
I think that sounds like a good, yeah. I think, you know, Alex raised some really, really solid points during the discussion, especially towards the end. Primarily towards the end, he raised some really solid points when he's describing animal agriculture, and he's just presenting the truth. And I think that was like bravo to you, Alex, for having the courage to go on to Mikhaila Peterson's podcast and present the truth. I think that takes courage. I think otherwise, I think throughout he panders to anecdote a lot. He gives so much leeway that debate isn't necessary for her anymore because she can just affirm that in states like hers that you can consume animals. And moreover, she argues that the majority of people are in a similar state of being. The majority, like a majority of Americans, she says, are sick. And they're sick because of chronic illness. And she put that down to lack of meat. And he did not push back. And so I'm going to say that this is an L for Alex.
L.
Like an absolute loss. In terms of the debate, he did not manage to refute her claims, and he didn't manage to instantiate his own without making such heavy concessions that they become moot.
Moot. I agree. I was deeply disappointed, and to be skeptical of like the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics while not being skeptical of her feelings and thoughts on a matter just made no sense to me whatsoever. Like, what a weird time to pick and choose when to be skeptical, pick and choose when to be empathetic, pick and choose what to be considered wrong. I just don't understand. I don't like it. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point as well, to say that we should be skeptical of what is, you know, like for the NHS and dietetics associations and medical institutions, yet but not be skeptical of personal anecdote.
Makes no sense.
As I said, like you could, like, I'm sorry to say this, but like so for example, I hate to say it, but like Jordan Peterson, like when he was talking about drinking apple juice and having a sense of impending doom, that doesn't sound right, man. That doesn't sound like that doesn't. I'm not sure if that is like. Don't get me wrong. It just it's possible that he has some sort of bacterial infection in his gut. But I think it's incredibly unlikely that someone should be locked into only eating meat and even only one kind of meat. That sounds like something has went wrong with your body to such an extreme that you really need an investigation into your lower intestine or into your small intestines for bacterial overgrowth.
Yeah, that shouldn't be happening. Absolutely not.
That should not be happening. So like, I think that there's too much gun jumping here, where the solution itself is maybe even indicative of the problem, where you end up going on an elimination diet without treating the underlying cause, which is not standard practice.
And not helpful.
No, not helpful. It makes things worse.
All right. Okay. Were there any final thoughts, PP? If not, I'll sign us off. And should I just keep this up and then you can put it on your channel?
Yeah. I might. I don't know. I don't know what I'll be. I need to put something up on my channel at some point soon. I've just been working on the course. I've almost finished it now, so it's almost there. So it's almost all ready. So
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll be putting something. I'll be there. I'll be there soon. So all of you who are my viewers who did pop by, thanks for coming. I will be back. I'll be home soon.
Subscribe to me, okay? In the
And
meantime,
yes,
I will
yes,
entertain.
subscribe. Do subscribe to Vegan Gays.
And subscribe to PP. He's in the title of this video stream. And yeah, thank you for coming on with me. And I would have only watched that for a now third time if I had you with me, because it's horrible. Made me so angry. But yeah, thank you to everyone who tipped. I really appreciate that. And until next time, salads, PP and I will see you soon. Say bye, PP.
Bye.
Bye, PP.